She was working hard to raise 2 young children on her own.
No one chooses to be a single mother.
Things didn't work out, so we went our separate ways.
Sometimes life's greatest lessons are learned through suffering.
But now, her life has come to a brutal end.
She was beaten, strangled, and repeatedly stabbed.
She fought like hell to save her own life and wasn't able to.
Did a custody dispute turn deadly?
Like most custody battles, there was issues.
Her ex was causing, quote, trouble.
Or did a new lover panic in the face of unexpected obligations?
She told me that she was raped.
Investigators struggled to identify the killer.
Anybody that she had been casually dating was a potential suspect.
It's becoming more and more perplexing.
But can police uncover the secret that led to her murder?
We all have stuff that we like to keep hidden.
I've never seen anybody be so cold-hearted in my entire life.
February 25th, 2015. It's a chilly Wednesday afternoon in Houston, Texas, America's 4th largest city.
Houston is a huge city. It keeps growing. People seem to flock here.
We have our host of different communities, and you can really find your place here.
But each year, most of these communities are touched by tragedy.
It's not like other cities where you don't hear about a murder for a month. We have hundreds a year.
And today, another name is about to be added to the city's list of victims.
Exterminator, anybody home?
An exterminator was spraying for bugs at a West Houston apartment complex.
Exterminator coming in.
As soon as he enters, he realizes there's someone in the apartment.
Ma'am? Ma'am? You okay?
There was a young woman lying face down on the floor of the apartment.
He thought, well, maybe she's sick, and then he saw the blood.
The exterminator rushes to get the building manager. And when she arrives, she immediately calls 911.
615 medical. What is your emergency?
I have one of the residents in this apartment. She doesn't seem that she is actually breathing.
Is she moving out at all?
No, she's not moving at all.
The resident is identified as Ebony Harris.
We have units in marked to that location.
28-year-old Ebony Harris had a magnetic personality.
Ebony was just, she loved music, she loved to sing, she was fire. And her humor was the best thing about her because she could laugh at the worst of times and make everything better.
But her resilience was tested by the hardships she faced growing up.
Ebony became a mother when she was just 17, and her relationship with the father didn't last long after the arrival of their baby.
She was growing up, but her partner was not.
The couple split up, but Ebony wasn't going to let that keep her from providing for her son.
When things got rough, she'd fight her way through it. She knew failure was not an option.
She was able to work in a shipping company and was providing for her family.
And soon, she had a second chance at romance.
She met a young man named Tavon, and they fell in love. And soon, they were living together.
He really provided that feeling of stability that Ebony was looking for.
When Ebony and Tavon had a son of their own, it looked like her vision of a perfect family had become reality.
It was a good time in her life. Another son to join her family. Good father looking after both her children and taking care of her.
But sadly, this relationship also didn't last.
In the long run, they didn't work
and they broke up. It was not a good season in her life. She needed to find shelter.
And for Ebony, the shelter she needed was with her family.
Her mother had moved up north and she remained here in Houston, but she had aunts and uncles and cousins. She was very close with.
She also remained close with her mom, even with the distance.
Ebony and I had a really, really close relationship. I was living here in Virginia, but told her, you know, I always got you. I'll always be there for you.
Ebony was able to turn to her mom for support.
Ebony and I had came up with a plan for her to move to Virginia, and we were gonna start a home daycare.
With her family behind her, Ebony was determined to keep moving forward.
She was just starting to get some momentum in her life.
But now, Ebony's been found unresponsive and bleeding on the floor of her apartment.
If anyone wanted to do CPR, I can give you instructions.
But it's too late for CPR.
She looks already kind of like purple.
When first responders arrived, they could see that she was face down and that she appeared to have stab wounds.
There was no way they could save her, and it was clear to them that she had been dead for a while.
Dispatch, I need homicide and CSI to this location.
While they wait for homicide detectives, police turn to the property manager for information on the victim.
The manager said that there were never any complaints about her from other tenants, but she really didn't know Ebony personally.
She has 2 little kids, 2 boys.
Where are they now?
I don't know.
Her sons weren't in the apartment.
Was this a kidnapping or something worse?
Where are these kids?
After her latest relationship ended, 28-year-old Houston native Ebony Harris was focused on raising her 2 sons.
It's hard being a single mom, but she worked really hard to provide for them and give them a good life.
But now she's been found stabbed to death in her apartment, and her 2 young sons are nowhere to be found.
Where are they now?
I don't know.
They didn't know if they were with family members, if they wandered out of the apartment, or if they've been abducted by the killer.
While police launch a search for the missing children, homicide detectives arrive and start by examining Ebony's body.
Ebony's own body really is the blueprint of the story that took place.
In addition to 15 stab wounds, there are bruises around her throat and on her head.
You have strangulation, you have blunt force trauma, and you have stab wounds. 3 of the most violent personal ways to kill somebody.
It's obvious to detectives that the fatal attack had been brutal and prolonged.
You could see that just from the wound pattern on her.
She had defensive wounds where it appeared that she had put her hands up to protect herself.
After her body is transported to the medical examiner's office, detectives begin examining Ebony's apartment.
Whoever did this was probably let in by Ebony because there was no signs of forced entry at all.
Whoever was inside that apartment, Ebony knew.
After finishing up inside, detectives canvass Ebony's neighbors, hoping that someone saw or heard something out of the ordinary.
You said you've been home all day. Did you hear anything suspicious today? Any loud noises? Anything from your upstairs neighbors or anything like that?
No, sir.
They just know Ebony as a good neighbor.
Ebony pretty much kept to herself. She wasn't somebody that, we think was involved in anything nefarious.
But as detectives finish talking to the neighbor, someone very close to Ebony arrives at the scene.
Excuse me? Excuse me? What's going on? A woman came up to the police and said that she was Katrina Sharp, and she was Ebony's cousin.
She lived nearby, and she saw all the police cars near Ebony's apartment and went to check on her.
Katrina is horrified when she learns what's happened to Ebony. But when she pulls herself together, she gives detectives their first lead.
This has to be her baby's daddy.
Ebony was involved in a custody battle.
His name is Tavon Lawson.
And that's the children's father?
Just the youngest boy.
Like most custody battles, there was issues.
It got pretty ugly.
What do you mean?
She says tensions flared when Ebony sent her sons to stay with their grandmother in Virginia.
She said, Mom, my babysitters keep letting me down, and my job already told me if I missed any more work, I was going to be terminated.
Being a single parent, she doesn't have someone to fill in the gaps.
I said, just send the kids back with me. And she sent both of the boys home with me, back to Virginia.
When Tavon found out, he was furious.
Tavon filed custody papers, and the court ordered Ebony to bring his son back to Houston.
Despite the custody resolution, the situation between them was still tense.
Ebony's ex was causing trouble. They've been having arguments.
Is that where the boy is now, with his father?
No, he's probably with Ebony's sister. She babysits for her.
And the older boy, he's still in Virginia?
Yeah.
With their first solid lead, detectives return to the homicide unit and contact Ebony's sister.
The reason I wanted to talk to you today is because you were babysitting her child. Is that correct?
Yes. Pretty much every day when she go to work.
Okay, and when did she drop him off?
She dropped him off Monday.
She told police she had been babysitting Ebony's youngest son, but Ebony failed to pick him up after work on Tuesday.
Her sister had kept him an extra night, and when she had to go to work that morning, she left the boy with her and Ebony's father.
After establishing that both of Ebony's sons are safe, detectives start looking at Tavon Lawson.
Given the custody battle, everybody can see why he's high-ranking on the list.
But when investigators try to get him for an interview, he's MIA.
Detectives couldn't reach Tavon, but they left messages that they wanted to talk to him.
They then subpoenaed Ebony's phone records so they could look at the recent contacts she had with them.
Before the records can be provided, detectives hear from Tavon, but not the way they expected.
Really? I'll be right down. Who is it? Tavon Lawson.
Tavon has come in to see the police, but not because they asked to talk to him.
Tavon's animated, and his voice is loud.
I want to see my son now.
Tavon Lawson, the prime suspect in the murder of his ex-girlfriend, Ebony Harris, has just arrived at the Houston Homicide Unit.
I want to see my son now.
It was interesting to the detectives because the only possible motive that they found for Ebony's murder so far was the custody problems she'd been having with Tavon over their son.
But is Tavon a suspect? Or just a concerned father?
I want to see my son now!
Calm down. Your son is safe. He's with Ebony's dad.
Once the detectives calmed Tavon down, he was very cooperative.
He wasn't happy, but he understood that he wouldn't be reunited with his son until he was cleared as a suspect.
So he sits down with detectives for an interview.
Tell me about your relationship with Ebony.
She got pregnant with my son. We had moved together. Things didn't work out, so we went our separate ways.
Ebony and her ex were, for the most part, congenial after they broke up and how they managed the child.
But that changed when Ebony sent her sons to Virginia to stay with her mother.
Moving the children created a lot of conflict between them.
He was furious that Ebony would make such an important decision without telling him.
But once the son was back in Houston and they had shared custody, his relationship with Ebony had improved somewhat.
Despite his battles with Ebony, this was the mother of his child, and he respected that.
Whoever done this, man, needs to be caught for the sake of my son. He loved his mom. I don't really know how I'm going to explain this to him.
He wanted to be as cooperative as he could as a concerned father.
And there could be an easy way to strike him from the suspect list.
The police asked him for a DNA swab, and he willingly gives it.
And if it comes back saying, hey, you were there, you know, I got to come back and be like, hey, man,
yeah,
what's up?
You know what? I'm not even worried about that. I got to be at work at 6:30.
You've been at work the entire day. From 6:30 in the morning.
Right.
They can
confirm that.
Their best lead, a likely dead end. Detectives ask Tavon if he knows of anyone who wanted to harm Ebony.
It was a guy at her job that she mentioned having problems with.
Who's this guy?
I don't know the name.
After the interview, investigators contact Tavon's supervisor at work.
Yeah, this is the Houston. It turns out he has a pretty solid alibi. He was at work all day. All right, thanks.
Tavon Lawson is in the clear. But when detectives call Ebony's mother, Patricia Buffalo, she isn't convinced.
Ebony's mother is thinking this is the guy who killed my daughter.
I've never seen anybody be so cold-hearted in my entire life.
But when the detective asks if there's anyone else who might harm her daughter, she does give them another name.
Ebony's mom was able to tell the detectives there's this man named Cedric.
Cedric was apparently dating her daughter, and they had broken up not too long before.
I walked in here and said, look, leave that guy alone. And she did. But I remember her telling me probably about 2 weeks ago that he contacted her.
She didn't know his last name. She didn't know how to get in touch with him. All she knew was that this was another person in Ebony's life.
Patricia says she thinks they met at Ebony's job.
But when detectives contacted the shipping company that Ebony works, it turned out to be another dead end.
So nobody named Cedric works there? All right, thanks.
When Ebony's phone records finally come in a few days later, investigators hope they can lead them to Cedric.
When the records were released, they showed that Ebony's last call was an hour-long conversation with her mother at 10:30 a.m. on February 24th.
In the hours prior to that last call, there's a flurry of activity on her phone.
There were a number of calls and texts to a number listed in her phone as Cedric. But that wasn't the only person Ebony was in contact with that morning.
They also find another name on Ebony's phone records, someone named Bay.
All kinds of text messages going back and forth.
After the likely time of Ebony's death, all incoming communication from Bay ceases.
There were a couple of messages from Cedric after that, and tons of activity from Ebony's family and friends, but nothing at all from Bay.
Now detectives are left wondering, could Bay be Ebony's killer?
This person, whoever Bay is a part of Ebony's life.
Did he go silent because he knew she was dead?
So who is Bay?
Hey, Bay.
For Houston detectives investigating the murder of 28-year-old single mother Ebony Harris, the list of possible suspects is growing.
Ebony's phone records show that she was communicating with two different men immediately before she was murdered. One listed in the phone as Cedric and the other as Bay.
Detectives first call the number connected to Cedric, the man Ebony had recently ended things with.
Detectives learned that his full name was Cedric Jacobs. When they told him they were calling about Ebony Harris, he seemed to have no idea what had happened to her.
The detectives break the news to him about Ebony. He's shocked.
And he agrees to come in for an interview.
He tells him that his relationship with Ebony was like a friends with benefits kind of thing.
I do have a girlfriend already, so I was just kind of dealing with her on the side.
Cedric claimed that he and Ebony only hooked up a handful of times around Christmas and New Year's.
But his story changes when detectives tell him they'd heard he and Ebony were going through a bad breakup.
Cedric kind of backtracked and did admit that he and Ebony had a falling out, but he said they reconnected around Valentine's Day.
According to Cedric, they went out to a bar, and Ebony fainted.
She got sick, and she fainted, so I carried her out.
But when he took her home, she dropped a bombshell.
She revealed to him that she was pregnant with twins.
After she told me that, I started questioning her about it, like, well, do you think I'm the father? What's the scenario here?
She's like, no.
She didn't say who the father was, though she did give a clue to his identity.
She was telling me that she might be pregnant by a guy in Virginia.
Is Cedric just trying to deflect attention from himself? Or is the man from Virginia the bae in Ebony's phone?
Ebony's mother lived in Virginia, and Ebony would often go back to visit her, but her mother hadn't mentioned anyone she was seeing there.
With nothing else to hold Cedric on, the detectives only have one more question.
Will you consent to a buccal swab for DNA?
Yeah, definitely.
After collecting his DNA, the autopsy report confirms that at least part of Cedric's story is true.
The autopsy revealed that Ebony was almost 6 weeks pregnant with twins when she was stabbed to death. The medical examiner took a DNA sample from the unborn children to compare with DNA samples from Tavon Lawson and Cedric Jacobs.
While waiting for the results, investigators focused their attention on identifying the man listed as bae in Ebony's phone.
When they started speaking to Ebony's friends, this idea kept coming up that she was kind of smitten with a guy that's in the Navy.
And the number listed for bae has a Norfolk, Virginia area code.
The Norfolk area is home to several major U.S. naval installations.
So detectives call Ebony's mother, Patricia Buffalo, again.
The detectives ask Ebony's mom, do you know of anybody that Ebony's been in touch with there in Virginia?
Patricia immediately gives them a name. Marcus Murphy.
Marcus Murphy is the neighbor of Patricia Buffalo's that's in the Navy.
But she can't understand why they're asking about him.
I said, that's my godson. This is somebody that I revered like one of my own children.
Marcus actually lived in the same apartment complex as Ebony's mom. Ebony would go to Virginia to see her mom, and it was on one of those visits where her mom introduced Ebony to Marcus.
Hey, Marcus, how are you doing?
Good.
I'm glad you're here. I'd like to introduce you to Ebony, my daughter.
Hi, it's nice to meet you.
Ebony and Marcus were close friends, but her mother insists that's all they were.
Marcus had a very serious girlfriend, and he had children with her. So I don't think that Miss Buffalo saw him as a romantic match for her daughter.
Oh, yes. Him and his girlfriends always helping me out. They're really good about that.
It's nice to hear that.
We're always happy to help.
Miss Buffalo could not believe that he could be involved in this in any way.
But alarm bells go off when, as Patricia gives them the number she has for Marcus, it's a match for bae's contact in Ebony's phone.
Now that they had identified Bae as Marcus, detectives flew to Norfolk, Virginia to try to talk to him and his commanding officer.
At the naval base, His commander tells the detectives that Marcus is temporarily on duty in Pensacola, Florida. But he can't imagine he'd be involved.
He had been in the Navy for several years. He was doing well.
He was making rank. It wasn't a paycheck for him. He actually enjoyed being in the Navy.
But the detectives are more interested in Marcus's character than his service record.
Is he manipulative? Did he have anger or any control issues?
Not that I ever saw. He never showed, like, overly aggressive behavior toward anyone else.
And nothing from his background check raised any red flags for commanders when Marcus had first joined the force either.
The expectation is that military folk could be a pillar of the community.
Detectives ask if there's any way Marcus could have been off the base for several days without anyone knowing.
His commanding officer informed them that they kept track of all their personnel. He even offered to show detectives their records.
This is our muster sheet. This tells us who is where on what days.
The detectives ask what the muster sheet shows on February 24th, the day Ebony was murdered.
On this day, Officer Murphy was on liberty.
Marcus was off duty from the 24th to the 26th.
That instantly makes him suspect number one.
Houston detectives investigating the murder of Ebony Harris have just learned that a Navy officer from Virginia that she'd secretly dated was on leave the same weekend that she was killed.
The investigators were faced with the possibility that Marcus Murphy had used his 3-day leave to fly to Houston and kill Ebony.
The next step for the detectives is to contact Marcus and get his side of the story.
There was one problem, though. Marcus was currently in Florida for training, so they couldn't speak with him face to face.
They returned to Houston and called Marcus to interview him over the phone.
Mr. Murphy?
Yeah.
Okay, hey.
Surprisingly, he readily admits that he did hook up with Ebony on one of her trips to Virginia.
Marcus shared some things about the relationship, but he didn't talk about the pregnancy.
And he says he knows nothing about Ebony's murder.
One thing they asked him was, were you ever in Houston? And he denies ever coming to our city.
Marcus says during his leave, he'd driven to Danville, Virginia to pick up his son from his mother.
He was with your mom?
Yeah.
So you were never in Houston that week?
Never.
Okay, well, that's all I really needed from you.
Marcus couldn't have committed the murder if he was halfway across the country in Virginia.
After talking to Marcus, investigators called his mother, and she confirmed that Marcus had picked the boy up on February 25th.
But is that the only place he went while on leave?
Marcus couldn't have driven to Houston, but he could have flown. So investigators reached out to the airlines to investigate the passenger records for the days around the murder.
It turns out that on February 24th, Marcus Murphy bought a plane ticket taking a flight from Charlotte, North Carolina to Houston.
Not only was he in Houston, he flew to Houston and then back to North Carolina, all in the same day. It's the same day as the murder.
And when investigators subpoena Marcus's phone records, they confirm what the airline manifest showed.
This phone puts him in Houston on the day that Ebony was murdered.
It's enough to get a warrant for Marcus Murphy's arrest.
Marcus was taken into custody in Pensacola, Florida, and held pending extradition to Texas.
Detectives fly from Houston to Florida to question him.
When he first went in the interview, he was open. He was just kind of having a conversation.
He's kind of acting like he doesn't have a care in the world.
So the detectives tell him that they know he flew to Houston the day Ebony was killed.
Now Marcus's story changes.
Yes, I was in Texas.
Marcus confirms he flew there to see Ebony.
He came to Houston so that he could help her out.
He says she told him she was pregnant with twins and struggling financially.
He told the investigators that he was flying here to give her $300.
This is pretty much who I am. I give every dime I have to someone who doesn't. I always have, I always will.
That did not make sense because he spent so much money purchasing flights and coming down here when he could have just wired her the money.
Marcus says that when he arrived at the apartment, Ebony was getting ready to go to work.
She was going to take a shower, and I hadn't ate anything all day.
Marcus said he walked to a nearby restaurant with the understanding that Ebony would meet him there after she got out of the shower, but she never showed up.
And she didn't answer when he tried calling her.
I went back, I knocked on the door, she didn't come to the door, and by this time my phone's alarmed me that it's time for me to go back to the airport.
Marcus says he took a cab to the airport to catch his flight back to Virginia.
When I got to the airport, I think I sent her a couple text messages calling saying, hey, you know, what happened? But I knew she said she had to go to work.
Marcus said he assumed she just left until after he got back to Virginia, and Ebony's mother got the news that she'd been killed.
Marcus says he was shocked, but also worried how his trip to Houston would look.
He tries to play it off that, well, I knew it made me look guilty.
The detectives don't buy his excuses, but they do have one final question.
Would you be willing to take a DNA test?
Sure, see if I'm the father?
Yes.
I would love to, because that was something that was like on my mind.
Waiting for the DNA results from the lab, detectives reach out to Marcus Murphy's girlfriend, Brianna Wright.
We learned that she did not know about this relationship that Marcus had with Ebony.
Brianna is stunned when she learns that police think Marcus could be responsible for Ebony's murder.
She was shocked to find out that Marcus had flown to Houston, so she actually went onto his email account and located the ticket.
I actually found the itinerary that showed when he flew out, when he got to Houston, when he left Houston.
Wow.
According to the itinerary, Marcus didn't make the trip alone.
It showed that his cousin was also on the flight with him.
Houston detectives are convinced that Marcus Murphy flew from North Carolina to Texas to kill 28-year-old single mother Ebony Harris. And now Marcus's girlfriend, Brianna, has told them that he didn't make the trip alone.
Brianna had looked at Marcus's flight itinerary.
He had his cousin, Ricky, with him. What is his involvement in this? Was he an accomplice?
After talking to Marcus's girlfriend, investigators arranged to interview his cousin in Virginia.
Why do you think we're talking to you?
According to Ricky, Marcus had called him the day before and said that he had 2 non-refundable airline tickets he needed to use.
But he says the only luggage they took was a carry-on bag that Marcus had.
Did you ask him what was in that bag?
The only thing that was in there was a jacket of his. And before we left that night, he bought 2 pairs of gloves.
Ricky says he wasn't really sure where they were going. But he says Marcus told him he wanted to see a woman he knew.
They had a layover in Atlanta, and then when they got to Houston, they took a cab to an apartment complex.
Ricky decides that he's just going to hang out for a little bit till his cousin does his business.
He says he walked to a nearby restaurant and got something to eat.
He called back and told me they were going to miss our flight and that we need to hear the leave.
Ricky said that he and Marcus took a cab back to the airport and flew home. He said that Marcus never told him what had happened at the apartment.
It didn't make a lot of sense to us, but we couldn't really disprove it either.
Ultimately, no charges are filed against Marcus's cousin.
The police and the district attorney were focused on assembling evidence against Marcus, not on making the case more complicated.
When DNA results come back from the lab, it's the final nail in the coffin for Marcus Murphy.
DNA found under Ebony's fingernails matched the DNA sample investigators took from Marcus. It proved beyond any doubt that he was the person that she fought with before she was murdered.
But the test results also reveal something surprising.
Another gentleman was, in fact, the father of her twins, and it was not Marcus Murphy.
That was really upsetting because we felt like, man, this was for nothing.
A truly senseless crime, and there will be a long wait for justice.
Ebony's family had to wait 7 years for this case to go to trial.
COVID shut our courthouse down, and we just had to be patient and wait.
In November of 2022, Marcus Murphy finally goes on trial for Ebony's murder.
He was charged with capital murder because he killed Ebony knowing that she was pregnant, so he was held responsible for killing more than one person.
In their opening statement, the prosecution argues that it was Ebony's pregnancy that led to the murder.
Ebony had told Marcus that she was pregnant with twins, and that she thought he was the father.
He realized that he was going to have to confess some things to his girlfriend that he did not want to.
He was acting on the fear of what that might mean for his life.
And what his fear made him do was carefully plan a murder.
You see in his search history that he's searching airplane flights, and he bought 2 pairs of gloves that he knew he was going to wear when he murdered this girl.
Then Marcus and his cousin Ricky flew to Houston.
Ricky raided in a nearby restaurant while Marcus went to Ebony's apartment.
She liked this guy, and I think she opened the door willingly.
Hey, babe. You should have told me you were here. I was about to take a shower.
I wanted to surprise you.
Marcus quickly revealed the real surprise.
You want something to eat?
Sure.
She had Marcus's DNA under her right hand fingernails, which indicates to us that she fought him.
She was able to get away, but Marcus grabbed a knife.
We believe the knife was taken from her knife block in the kitchen.
You don't have to stab someone 15 times to kill them. But because of the emotional state he was in, he just kept going.
When Ebony was dead, Marcus left her lying in her blood.
Marcus cleaned any blood that had gotten on him and left the apartment. Somewhere on his walk back to meet his cousin Ricky, he disposed of the knife. And then they got a taxi back to the airport.
Sitting through the prosecution's case is an emotional ordeal for Ebony's family.
The family saw the brutal autopsy photos. They heard all this graphic testimony.
I did excuse myself out the courtroom a few times.
But through it all, the defense maintains that Marcus didn't kill Ebony Harris.
They argued that Marcus went to her apartment that day but actually never saw her, and then went back to the airport.
The defense's argument was that it was somebody else involved in her life.
And they also attempt to dismiss the DNA evidence.
The defense claimed that there could be DNA from Marcus under Ebony's fingernails because she scratched him the last time they had sex.
We had a DNA expert to testify. Unless she didn't shower from November until February when she was killed, that it would be completely unlikely that his DNA would have remained under her fingernail.
The jury isn't impressed by the defense's arguments.
The jury found Marcus Murphy guilty of capital murder, which in the state of Texas was an automatic sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole.
The family's long wait is finally over.
I had a lot of joy, because my baby finally got some justice.
But nothing can restore what Marcus Murphy took from Ebony's family.
Once you lose someone, you never get over it. It gets a little easier, but you never get over it.
Had Marcus just waited a little while longer, he would have been able to establish that he wasn't the father. A beautiful life was lost because he made the wrong assumptions.
The sky over Houston in late February 2015 did not carry the comforting warmth typically associated with the sprawling expanse of Texas. Instead, a biting, relentless chill from a retreating winter still gripped the nation's fourth-largest city. It was a chilly Wednesday afternoon, the kind of day where the bustling rhythm of urban life usually pushes people indoors, seeking the shelter and comfort of home. In a quiet apartment complex tucked away in West Houston, the atmosphere was thick with a deceptive tranquility. Houston is a massive, sprawling metropolis that never truly sleeps. People flock here from all corners of the country, drawn by the promise of opportunity, community, and a place to call their own. It is a city of distinct neighborhoods, each with its own heartbeat and pulse. Yet, beneath the shiny surface of economic growth and urban expansion lies a darker reality. Unlike smaller towns where a single violent crime might dominate local headlines for months, Houston's sheer size means tragedy is a frequent visitor. Hundreds of homicides stain its streets every year. But on this particular afternoon, February 25, 2015, another name was about to be savagely etched onto the city's endless list of victims, a name that would haunt the detectives tasked with uncovering the truth. The heavy silence of the West Houston apartment was broken only by the mechanical hiss of a portable spraying device. An exterminator going about his routine duties walked through the complex to spray for pests. Pushing open a door that was unlocked or perhaps left ajar, he stepped inside the apartment, his voice cutting through the quiet with the casual announcement of his trade. "Exterminator, anybody home?" "Exterminator coming in." There was no answering voice. No footsteps hurrying down a hallway. Only a heavy, suffocating stillness that seemed to press down from the ceiling. As the exterminator moved further into the unit, a strange metallic scent caught in the back of his throat, the unmistakable iron-rich tang of fresh blood. His eyes scanned the living area and locked onto a horrifying sight on the floor. Lying face down, motionless, was a young woman. At first, a desperate, rationalizing thought flashed through his mind. Maybe she is sick. Maybe she fainted. But that fragile illusion shattered instantly as his gaze tracked downward, revealing a widening pool of dark, viscous blood soaking into the carpet beneath her. Panic surged. The exterminator did not hesitate. He spun around, bolted out of the apartment, and frantically flagged down the building manager. When the manager rushed to the threshold and took in the horrifying tableau, she did not waste a single second. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911. The machinery of the state was set into motion, and the address was instantly broadcast across police frequencies. Homicide and crime scene investigators were needed immediately at a West Houston apartment complex. As first responders swarmed the scene, their trained eyes took in the grim reality before them. There was no need for CPR, no frantic attempts at resuscitation. The brutalized body of the young woman was cold, her lifeless form bearing silent witness to an explosion of unimaginable violence. She had not simply been killed. She had been systematically hunted down and destroyed in her own sanctuary. Outside the yellow police tape, the neighborhood began to murmur. Neighbors peered through window blinds, whispering in hushed tones, shocked that such terror could bleed into their quiet corner of the world. But as investigators began their grim preliminary sweep, a chilling realization gripped them. Where were the children? Property managers and early responders quickly learned that the resident of this apartment was a young mother. She had 2 little boys. Yet, as officers searched the premises from room to room, opening closets and checking under beds, the apartment was devastatingly empty of little feet, small toys, and childish laughter. The immediate terrifying question hung in the stale air of the crime scene. Where were the children? Were they taken by the monster who snuffed out their mother's life? Had they wandered off, alone and terrified? Or were they hidden somewhere nearby, too young to understand the nightmare that had unfolded around them? The victim was soon identified as 28-year-old Ebony Harris. To the outside world, she was just another statistic in a violent city, a new name added to the ledger of the dead. But to those who truly knew her, Ebony was a force of nature. She possessed a magnetic, radiant personality. She loved music with a fierce passion, and she loved to sing, her voice carrying the hopes and dreams of a young woman striving for a better tomorrow. Her friends and family would later describe her as pure fire. Her humor was legendary, capable of slicing through the darkest moments and making everything feel manageable, even when the world seemed determined to crush her spirit. Yet, life had not dealt Ebony an easy hand. Her resilience was forged in the fires of early hardship. She had become a mother at the tender age of 17, thrust into the grueling world of parenthood before she had even finished growing up herself. The father of her first child was not ready for the immense weight of responsibility. While Ebony matured overnight, stepping up to embrace the daunting challenge of motherhood, her partner faltered. The relationship fractured and eventually dissolved, leaving Ebony to face the unforgiving world as a single mother. For Ebony, failure was never an option. When life threw obstacles in her path, she did not back down. She fought her way through them with a fierce, unyielding determination. She secured a job at a shipping company, working grueling hours to put food on the table, a roof over her head, and clothes on her growing son's back. She was the embodiment of resilience, a young woman refusing to let her circumstances dictate her destiny. And for a brief, beautiful moment, the universe seemed to reward her tenacity. She met a young man named Tavon and a spark ignited. They fell deeply in love and before long they moved in together. Tavon brought into her life the profound sense of stability and security she had craved for so long. When they welcomed a son of their own into the world, Ebony's vision of a complete, loving family finally felt like reality. It was a golden season in her life. Here was a good man, a dedicated father looking after both of her children, wrapping her world in warmth and safety. But life, cruel and unpredictable, has a way of unraveling even the most carefully woven dreams. Over time, the cracks in the relationship began to widen. Despite their best efforts, Tavon and Ebony drifted apart. The romance faded, replaced by the bitter residue of incompatibility. The breakup was not amicable, plunging Ebony into a dark, difficult season. She found herself struggling to maintain her footing, needing a safe harbor from the storm. With her mother having previously relocated up north to Virginia, Ebony relied on her local network of aunts, uncles, and cousins in Houston, remaining deeply connected to her roots. Despite the physical distance, her bond with her mother remained unbreakable. They spoke constantly, sharing dreams, fears, and plans for the future. Recognizing the immense strain Ebony was under, juggling a demanding job, raising 2 boys alone, and fighting off the crushing weight of isolation, her mother offered a lifeline. They hatched a plan. Ebony and her sons would eventually move up to Virginia, where they would start fresh, opening a home daycare together, surrounded by family who loved and supported them. Ebony had started to regain her footing, feeling the faint, promising winds of momentum pushing her forward. She was a woman on the verge of a new beginning, ready to leave her struggles behind and step into the light. Instead, she was found face down, motionless, and bleeding on the floor of her apartment, her life violently extinguished before she could reach that promised land. As homicide detectives took control of the crime scene, the air grew thick with the solemn weight of professional detachment. They looked down at Ebony's broken body, knowing instinctively that her final moments had not been peaceful. The physical evidence whispered of a terrifying struggle, a desperate, heartbreaking fight for survival against an attacker who had brought unmitigated malice into her home. The detectives began the meticulous process of documenting every square inch of the apartment. They dusted for fingerprints, collected stray fibers, and cataloged the positions of furniture, searching for any microscopic detail that could point them toward the killer. Yet, even in those early chaotic moments, one terrifying truth stood out like a beacon in the dark. There were no signs of forced entry. The door had not been kicked in. The windows were intact. Whoever had crossed that threshold and delivered those fatal blows had not broken in. They had been let in. Ebony knew her killer. Outside, as detectives fanned out across the apartment complex to canvass neighbors, the heavy scent of rain began to mingle with the crisp evening air. They knocked on doors, hoping against hope that someone had heard a scream, a scuffle, a heavy thud, or the slamming of a door. But the responses were dishearteningly uniform. Neighbors described Ebony as a quiet, kind, good neighbor, someone who kept to herself, minded her own business, and never brought trouble to the building. No one had heard anything out of the ordinary. No one suspected that just yards away from their own living rooms, a young mother was fighting for her life. Then, breaking through the perimeter of police tape, a frantic, grief-stricken figure arrived at the scene. A young woman pushed past officers, tears streaming down her face, screaming out in agony. She identified herself as Katrina Sharp, Ebony's cousin. Living nearby, she had seen the flashing lights, felt a sudden, cold dread in her stomach, and rushed over to see if her worst fears were true. When detectives gently broke the news that Ebony was gone, that she had been murdered, Katrina collapsed under the weight of the grief. But as she fought to pull herself together, the sheer horror of the revelation gave way to clarity. Through her tears, Katrina handed the detectives their very first vital lead. It had to be him, she insisted. Ebony had been locked in a bitter, high-stakes custody battle with her ex-partner. His name was Tavon Lawson. The mention of Tavon's name shifted the trajectory of the investigation instantly. Detectives leaned in, absorbing every detail. Katrina explained that tensions between Ebony and Tavon had escalated dangerously in recent weeks. The breaking point had come when Ebony, overwhelmed by failing babysitters and threats from her employer about missing more work, made a desperate executive decision. She had sent her sons to stay safely with their grandmother up in Virginia, far away from the mounting stress of Houston. When Tavon discovered that his son had been sent out of state without his explicit consent, he was incandescent with rage. The custody battle that followed had turned vicious, spilling over into ugly legal filings and heated confrontations. The courts had eventually ordered Ebony to bring the young boy back to Houston, establishing a shared custody arrangement. But the legal resolution had done nothing to heal the festering wounds between them. Tavon was causing trouble, pushing buttons, and fueling a toxic environment of argument and resentment. Armed with this explosive new information, detectives wasted no time. They needed to find Tavon Lawson, and they needed to find him fast. They needed to know if this bitter custody dispute had finally crossed the bloody line from legal warfare to cold-blooded murder, or if the truth of what happened to Ebony Harris lay hidden somewhere else entirely, waiting to be unearthed from the shadows. The investigation into the brutal murder of 28-year-old Ebony Harris now hinged on unraveling the complex web of her personal life, beginning with the tumultuous dynamics surrounding her children and the city they called home. To truly understand how a young mother's life could be extinguished so violently within the walls of her own apartment, detectives had to zoom out and examine the sprawling backdrop of Houston, Texas, a city that served as both a land of boundless opportunity and a silent witness to countless tragedies. Houston in 2015 was a behemoth of a city, spreading across the landscape with an insatiable hunger for growth. As America's fourth-largest city, it operated on a massive scale, drawing in thousands of new residents every month. People flocked to Houston from every corner of the country, lured by the promise of affordable housing, a booming job market, and the chance to build a better life from the ground up. It was a mosaic of diverse communities, each carving out its own distinct identity within the sprawling urban grid. Whether you were looking for the vibrant energy of downtown, the quiet comfort of suburban-style pockets, or the fast-paced grind of the industrial sectors, Houston had a place for you. Yet, this rapid, relentless expansion came with a heavy human cost. Unlike smaller, tight-knit communities where a single violent crime would dominate local news cycles, spark neighborhood vigils, and remain the talk of the town for months, Houston operated at a different, more desensitized tempo. The sheer volume of residents meant that tragedy was an uninvited guest arriving far too often. Hundreds of homicides stained the city's streets every single year. It was a sobering reality that weighed heavily on the shoulders of the men and women of the Houston Police Department Homicide Division. They worked in a perpetual state of triage, moving swiftly from one crime scene to the next, knowing that behind every cold statistic was a shattered family waiting for answers. On that chilly Wednesday afternoon, February 25, 2015, Ebony Harris became one of those statistics, her name abruptly and brutally added to Houston's ever-growing ledger of victims. But to the detectives assigned to her case, she was never just a number. She was a human being whose life had been violently ripped away, leaving behind two little boys who now had to navigate a world without their mother. To grasp the full weight of the tragedy, investigators needed to understand the environment Ebony had been trying so hard to navigate. Being a single mother is an unyielding, often grueling marathon, and Ebony had been running it almost entirely on her own. She was working hard at a local shipping company, clocking long hours, lifting heavy burdens, and pushing past physical and mental exhaustion, just to keep a roof over her children's heads and food on the table. She had no safety net, no luxury of a fallback plan. When babysitters canceled at the last minute, or when her demanding job threatened her employment status if she missed another day, Ebony felt the crushing walls of isolation closing in on her. Yet, her resilience was legendary among those who knew her best. Those who loved Ebony remembered her as a woman of immense fire and spirit. She possessed a magnetic personality that naturally drew people toward her, lighting up even the most mundane rooms with her infectious laugh. She loved music deeply, often finding solace and expression in song, using melodies as a temporary escape from the grinding hardships of daily survival. Her sense of humor was her greatest armor. Even in the darkest, most stressful times, she could find a way to laugh, turning pain into perseverance and making everything feel just a little bit brighter for her boys. Her journey had not been easy. Ebony had been thrust into the unforgiving world of motherhood at just 17 years old, a teenager herself when she welcomed her first son into the world. The father of that child had been entirely unequipped for the monumental responsibility of family life. While Ebony grew up overnight, stepping up to embrace her new role with fierce dedication, her partner faltered under the pressure. The relationship fractured beyond repair, leaving Ebony to shoulder the financial and emotional load entirely by herself. But she refused to break. She pushed through the adversity, treating failure not as an option, but as a forbidden concept. Years later, when she met Tavon Lawson, a glimmer of genuine hope had entered her life. Tavon brought a comforting sense of stability, stepping into her world and offering the kind of steady support she had craved for so long. When they welcomed a son of their own, it felt as though Ebony's vision of a complete, harmonious family had finally become a reality. For a golden fleeting season, life felt good. She had a partner who seemed to care for both of her children, easing the heavy burden she had carried for so years. But as so often happens in the unpredictable theater of human relationships, that fragile peace did not last. Over time, the romantic connection eroded, replaced by incompatibility and friction. The eventual breakup plunged Ebony into a difficult, turbulent season. Without a local partner to share the load, she found herself desperately needing shelter. Not just physical shelter, but emotional sanctuary. Her mother, Patricia Buffalo, had previously relocated up north to Virginia, putting hundreds of miles between them, but the physical distance did little to weaken their unbreakable bond. Ebony and Patricia spoke constantly, sharing the intimate details of their lives. Patricia remained a steadfast pillar of emotional support, telling her daughter repeatedly, "I've always got you. I'll never let you fall." Recognizing the mounting pressure Ebony was facing in Houston, juggling her shipping company job, struggling with unreliable childcare, and drowning in the stress of single parenthood, mother and daughter had crafted a concrete, hopeful plan. Ebony was going to pack up her life, move her family to Virginia, and together they were going to start fresh by opening a home daycare. With her family standing directly behind her, Ebony finally felt the wind of momentum shifting in her favor. She was ready to turn the page. Instead, a monster crossed her threshold, ending her story before she could catch that promising wind. As investigators peeled back the layers of her recent life, the immediate focus naturally zeroed in on the bitter custody battle that had consumed her final months. When childcare had completely fallen through in Houston and her employer issued a stark warning that any further misshifts would result in immediate termination, Ebony had made a desperate, protective mother's choice. Without consulting Tavon, she packed her son's bags and sent them safely up to Virginia to stay with Patricia, removing them from the chaotic environment and giving herself breathing room to keep her job. When Tavon discovered that his young son had been taken out of state without his consent, his reaction was explosive. To a father already sensitive about his parental rights, it felt like an unforgivable betrayal. Tensions flared instantly, turning a stressful co-parenting dynamic into a bitter, ugly legal war. Tavon had immediately rushed to file emergency custody papers, forcing the courts to step in and order Ebony to return his son to Houston. Even though the court ultimately established a shared custody schedule, the legal resolution did little to soothe the underlying animosity. According to family members, Tavon had continued to cause trouble, weaponizing the custody arrangement to keep the friction alive, engaging in heated arguments with Ebony that left her emotionally drained and deeply anxious. With this explosive conflict staring them in the face, detectives knew they had to find Tavon Lawson immediately. They needed to know whether the courtroom battles had spilled out into the real world with fatal consequences. But when investigators initially attempted to contact him to request a formal interview, Tavon was completely MIA. Phone calls went straight to voicemail, and officers left urgent messages echoing in the digital void. To bridge the gap while they searched for him, detectives quickly subpoenaed Ebony's cell phone records, hoping her recent digital footprint would reveal the true nature of her communications with Tavon, and perhaps expose any hidden threats or desperate pleas. They knew that in modern homicide investigations, a victim's phone was often the silent diary of their final days, chronicling every fear, every secret, and every potential enemy. As the detectives awaited the arrival of those crucial phone records, sitting in the quiet tension of the precinct office, the investigation took a sudden theatrical turn. The heavy glass doors of the homicide unit swung open, and a loud animated voice pierced the professional quiet of the squad room. "I want to see my son now." All heads turned. Striding into the station, uninvited and vibrating with volatile energy, was Tavon Lawson. He hadn't come because the police had called him. He had come because he had heard whispers of the tragedy and was demanding his child. The prime suspect in the murder of Ebony Harris had just walked right into the lion's den, setting the stage for a high-stakes confrontation that would either crack the case wide open or send investigators chasing down yet another devastating dead end. The abrupt arrival of Tavon Lawson at the Houston Homicide Unit instantly shifted the electric charge in the squad room. Striding through the secure doors with heavy footsteps and an aggressive posture, he demanded answers, his voice echoing off the concrete walls and drawing the sharp, analytical gazes of every veteran detective in the room. He was not there to cooperate with a polite police inquiry. He was a frantic, furious father acting on rumors, demanding to know where his child was. For the homicide detectives observing him, this theatrical entrance presented an immediate psychological puzzle. Was Tavon's explosive display the genuine anguish of a loving father kept away from his flesh and blood, or was it a carefully calculated performance, a smokescreen designed to project righteous indignation and deflect suspicion away from a murderer? Detectives moved quickly to de-escalate the tension, intercepting him before the situation could spiral entirely out of control. They guided him away from the open bullpen and into the sterile, quiet confines of an interview room. "Calm down," one detective instructed firmly, maintaining a neutral, authoritative tone. "Your son is safe. He is with Ebony's dad." The mention of the child's safety acted like a sudden anchor on Tavon's volatile energy. The rigid tension in his shoulders dropped a fraction, and the aggressive defiance in his eyes flickered, replaced by a complex mix of relief and lingering agitation. He understood the gravity of the situation. He knew that until he was thoroughly vetted and cleared by homicide investigators, he would not be allowed anywhere near his son. Realizing that cooperation was his only ticket out of the precinct and back to his child, Tavon sank into the metal chair across from the detectives, crossed his arms and agreed to talk. The interview began with a methodical probing into the architecture of his past with Ebony. "Tell me about your relationship with Ebony," the lead detective asked, leaning forward, his eyes locked onto Tavon's face, searching for micro-expressions, shifts in posture, or any telltale signs of deception. Tavon exhaled heavily, his demeanor shifting from hostile to cooperative, adopting the weary cadence of a man forced to recount a painful history. "She got pregnant with my son," Tavon explained, his voice losing its prior volume, dropping into a low, measured register. "We had moved together. Things didn't work out. So we went our separate ways. According to Tavon, the dissolution of their romantic relationship had not initially birthed a monster. For the most part, he insisted, they had managed to maintain a relatively congenial civil dynamic when it came to co-parenting their young son. They were two young people trying to figure out the chaotic maze of raising a child apart, and for a long time they had kept the peace. That fragile truce, however, had violently fractured when Ebony made the executive decision to ship her boys up to Virginia to stay with her mother. Tavon did not try to hide the bitter resentment that period had caused. He leaned forward, the anger briefly flaring back to life in his eyes as he described the shock of discovering that his child had been moved across state lines without his knowledge or consent. To him, it was an unforgivable usurpation of his parental rights. It had driven him to fury, pushing him into emergency legal filings and bitter courtrooms battles just to ensure his voice was heard. Yet, Tavon was careful to frame those battles as strictly legal disputes, not violent vendettas. He maintained that once the court stepped in, established shared custody, and brought his son back to Houston, his relationship with Ebony had slowly improved. Despite the lingering friction, she was still the mother of his child, a fact he claimed to respect. "Whoever done this man need to be caught for the sake of my son," Tavon stated, his voice carrying a veneer of conviction. He loved his mom. "I don't really know how I'm gonna explain this to him." Detectives listened, weighing every word against the physical evidence collected from the crime scene. They needed hard data to either lock him in as their prime suspect or strike him cleanly from the board. The easiest, most definitive way to test his claims was sitting right in front of them. The detectives asked Tavon for a voluntary DNA swab. Without hesitation, Tavon nodded, rolling up his sleeves and offering no resistance. "And if they come back saying, 'Hey, you were there,' I gotta come back and be like, 'Hey man, yeah, what's up?'" He muttered with a shrug, projecting an aura of supreme confidence. "You know what? I'm not even worried about that. I gotta be at work at 6:30. That casual mention of his work schedule triggered a vital investigative checkpoint. Detectives immediately pivoted, pressing him for details about his whereabouts on the day Ebony was murdered. Tavon didn't blink. He stated firmly that he had been clocked in and working his regular shift from early morning straight through the day. To verify his alibi, investigators wasted no time. Following up on his statements, they contacted Tavon's supervisor at his workplace in Houston. The employment records and managerial statements painted a rock-solid picture. Tavon Lawson had indeed been at work the entire day, logging hours precisely when a killer was ending Ebony's life across town. Faced with a verified alibi and a clean DNA swab, detectives had no legal grounds to hold him. Their best, most obvious lead, the bitter ex-boyfriend locked in a fierce custody battle, was rapidly dissolving into a dead end. Tavon Lawson was officially in the clear. As Tavon walked out of the Houston Homicide Unit, a free man reunited with the grim reality of his grief, the investigation suffered a momentary stall. But deep in the trenches of the precinct, Ebony's mother, Patricia Buffalo, refused to accept that the man who had tormented her daughter in life was innocent of her death. When detectives called Patricia to brief her on the developments, the raw grief in her voice was instantly overshadowed by a mother's fierce, unyielding intuition. Patricia was convinced, down to the marrow of her bones, that Tavon was the architect of her daughter's destruction. "It has to be him," she insisted over the phone, arguing that the custody war was the root of all evil in Ebony's final months. Yet, when detectives pressed her gently, asking if there was anyone else, any other man who might have harbored dark intentions, or whose presence in Ebony's life had turned toxic, Patricia paused. The veil of certainty slipped and she offered up a new name, pulling the investigation away from the custody dispute and into the murkier, more unpredictable waters of Ebony's romantic entanglements. "There's this man named Cedric," Patricia told the detectives. Cedric, she explained, had been casually dating her daughter in the months leading up to the murder. They had recently broken up, a split that had left a bitter aftertaste, though Patricia admitted she knew very little about him. She didn't know his last name, she didn't know where he lived, and she had no direct way to contact him. All she knew was that Cedric had been a significant presence in Ebony's life during a turbulent transitional period, and they had met through Ebony's workplace at the shipping company. Armed with this fresh fragment of information, Detectives immediately turned their attention back to the shipping company, hoping to track down a coworker named Cedric. But that avenue met an immediate brick wall. Management and HR records yielded no employee matching that description who had shared a romantic history with Ebony. The trail went cold almost as quickly as it had opened, leaving the detectives searching for a ghost in a machine. It wasn't until Ebony's official cell phone records finally arrived at the precinct a few days later that the digital ghosts began to materialize. The thick packet of data provided by the telecommunications provider served as the ultimate forensic map of Ebony's final hours, chronicling the frantic pulse of her social world, right up until the moment it was silenced forever. The records showed that Ebony's very last voice conversation had taken place at 10:30 a.m. on February 24th, an hour-long heart-to-heart with her mother, Patricia, bridging the physical gap between Texas and Virginia with words of comfort and future plans. But as detectives traced the digital footprints backward from that final call, a startling flurry of activity emerged. In the hours and days leading up to her death, Ebony's phone was a buzzing hive of communication. Dominating the logs were numerous calls and text messages exchanged with a number saved under a familiar name. Cedric. The elusive coworker was real, and his digital footprint proved he had maintained a heavy line of communication with Ebony right up until the edge of the tragedy. However, Cedric was not the only anomaly in the log. As investigators scanned further down the rows of timestamps, another name leaped off the page, capturing their absolute attention. Listed simply as Bay, this mysterious contact had engaged in a rapid-fire exchange of text messages with Ebony throughout the critical window leading up to her murder. Then came the most chilling discovery of all. The exact moment the timeline fractured. Following the estimated time of Ebony's death, all incoming communication from the contact named Bay ceased with absolute, terrifying finality. Not a single text. Not a missed call. Not a single digital breath. While a few messages from Cedric trickled in afterward, and an overwhelming storm of panicked texts and calls flooded the phone from Ebony's genuinely distraught family and friends, Bay went completely, deafeningly silent. The silence spoke volumes. In the language of modern homicide investigations, a sudden unnatural cessation of contact from a romantic partner or close associate following a crime is rarely a coincidence. It is often the deafening roar of a guilty conscience. Detectives leaned over the desk, staring at the phone records under the harsh fluorescent lights, a cold realization settling over the room. Who was Bay? Why had he gone completely dark the exact moment Ebony drew her last breath? Was this mysterious figure the real monster who had slipped past the initial dragnet, hiding behind a simple three-letter nickname while orchestrating a brutal, calculated execution? The hunt for the truth was about to take a dramatic, cross-country leap, pulling the investigators far away from the streets of Houston and straight toward the coastal tides of Virginia. The digital ghosts haunting Ebony Harris's cell phone records had suddenly transformed the trajectory of the investigation, pulling homicide detectives away from the exhausted leads of custody disputes and into a murky, multi-layered labyrinth of romantic entanglements. At the center of this new web were two distinct names that had dominated her final hours of communication: Cedric and the mysterious, abruptly silent contact saved simply as Bay. With Tavon Lawson's alibi verified and his DNA clearing him of physical presence at the crime scene, the detectives turned their full, unrelenting focus toward these two digital footprints. They needed to find out who these men were, what role they played in Ebony's life, and why one of them had vanished into total digital silence the very moment her life was extinguished. The first target was the name already partially familiar to them through Ebony's mother, Cedric. Digging deeper into the phone logs, investigators traced the number associated with the contact and quickly identified him in full: Cedric Jacobs. Unlike the dead-end inquiries at the shipping company where coworkers had drawn blanks, the phone records provided a direct pipeline to his doorstep. Detectives made the call, informing him bluntly that they were investigating the murder of Ebony Harris. Over the phone line, Cedric's immediate reaction was a masterclass in performative shock. He sounded entirely disoriented, stumbling over his words as if the news of her brutal death had materialized out of thin air. When detectives asked him to come down to the precinct for a formal interview, he readily agreed, eager, or at least appearing eager, to distance himself from any suspicion. Sitting across from investigators in the sterile interview room, Cedric painted a picture of their relationship that was casual, detached, and entirely non-committal. It was like a friends with benefits kind of thing, Cedric claimed, leaning back in his chair with an air of nonchalant detachment. I do have a girlfriend already, so I was just kind of dealing with her on the side. According to Cedric's initial timeline, his encounters with Ebony were few and far between, fleeting, private hookups that occurred only a handful of times around the holidays of Christmas and New Year. He tried to project the image of a man whose footprint in Ebony's life was light, insignificant, and utterly devoid of heavy emotional stakes or dramatic conflict. But detectives in a homicide unit do not rely on self-serving narratives. They rely on pressure, contradictions, and physical truth. The investigators interrupted his smooth facade, confronting him with information they had gathered from family statements, specifically the whispers of a bitter, volatile breakup that had occurred between them. Faced with the pushback, Cedric's carefully constructed story began to crack. The nonchalant posture slipped, and he nervously backtracked, finally conceding that things had indeed grown rocky. He admitted that he and Ebony had suffered a significant falling out, a turbulent patch that had strained their casual arrangement. However, he quickly pivoted to soften the blow, claiming they had miraculously managed to patch things up just in time for Valentine's Day. According to Cedric, they had gone out together to a local bar to celebrate the holiday. But the night had taken a sudden, alarming physical turn. Out of nowhere, Ebony had fainted, collapsing under the invisible weight of her mounting physical and mental exhaustion. Cedric claimed he had stepped up, playing the role of the concerned companion, gathering her up and driving her safely back to her apartment. Yet, it was what happened inside the quiet sanctuary of that apartment that Cedric claimed dropped a bombshell into his lap. A revelation so heavy it cast an entirely new shadow over the entire investigation. As they sat talking inside her home, Cedric stated that Ebony had looked at him with a deadpan, terrifying seriousness and delivered news that left him completely paralyzed. She was pregnant with twins. Detectives leaned forward, their eyes narrowing. She's like, no, Cedric recounted, explaining how he had reacted to the sudden, staggering responsibility of fatherhood. But when pressed on whether she had explicitly named him as the father of those unborn children, Cedric hesitated. He claimed that while she didn't definitively pin the paternity on him, she had dropped cryptic hints pointing toward another man. Someone else entirely, whose identity hung in the air like an unresolved riddle. Was Cedric simply spinning a self-serving web of lies to deflect attention away from his own turbulent history with her? Or was he telling a fractured truth, pointing the finger away from himself and toward the mysterious figure lurking in the digital shadows of Ebony's phone logs? Detectives listened with a healthy dose of skepticism, recognizing that in murder investigations, everyone has an agenda. But they didn't need to guess about the truth of the pregnancy. Science was already at work in the background. Following standard protocol during the autopsy, the medical examiner had performed rigorous internal examinations that yielded a stunning, undeniable medical fact. Ebony Harris was, at the time of her murder, almost 6 weeks pregnant with twins. The autopsy report lent immediate, chilling credibility to at least a portion of Cedric's statement. To settle the paternity question once and for all, the medical examiner extracted DNA samples from the unborn children, preserving them in a secure biological archive to be compared against every male suspect the police could round up, including Tavon Lawson and Cedric Jacobs. Before releasing Cedric from the station, detectives collected his mandatory DNA swab, filing it away alongside Tavon's. Cedric walked out of the precinct, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions, but the spotlight was already shifting rapidly away from him. The digital trail on Ebony's phone was pointing eastward, across state lines, toward a completely different world and a man whose presence in her life had been carefully downplayed by almost everyone who knew her. It was time to decode the identity of Bay. As investigators began speaking more deeply with Ebony's closest friends in Houston, a recurring whispered theme began to surface. Friends recalled that during her lighter moments, Ebony had spoken of a man she was quietly smitten with. A man who didn't live in Texas, but whose life was anchored thousands of miles away on the coast of Virginia. When detectives cross-referenced the area code of the phone number saved under the name Bay, the geographic puzzle pieces clicked into place. It carried a Norfolk, Virginia area code. The coastal region around Norfolk is legendary for housing some of the largest, most strategic U.S. naval installations in the country. It was a massive military hub, a city of sailors, discipline, and strict operational structures. Realizing that this lead required a broader perspective, detectives placed a strategic phone call back up north, reaching out once again to Ebony's grieving mother, Patricia Buffalo. They asked her a direct, targeted question. Do you know of anyone that Ebony has been in touch with out there in Virginia, someone connected to the military? Patricia's response was instantaneous, but it carried an overwhelming tone of disbelief and absolute defense. Without hesitation, she gave them a name: Marcus Murphy. The moment the name dropped, a heavy wave of cognitive dissonance hit the investigators. Marcus Murphy was not some shadowy, dangerous stranger operating on the fringes of society. According to Patricia, he was her own godson. He was a young man whom Patricia revered and loved as if he were one of her own biological children. As Patricia explained their connection, the pieces of a bizarre social web fell into place. Marcus actually lived in the exact same apartment complex as Patricia up in Virginia. During Ebony's frequent visits to her mother's home to escape the pressures of her life in Houston, she had crossed paths with Marcus. It was Patricia herself who had formally introduced her daughter to her trusted godson, watching with maternal approval as a warm, platonic friendship blossomed between them. "That's my godson," Patricia insisted defensively over the phone, struggling to comprehend why the police would even utter his name in connection with the homicide. She described how Marcus and his serious, long-term girlfriend, with whom he shared children, were constant pillars of support in her daily life, always dropping by to help her carry groceries, fix broken items around the apartment, or lend a compassionate ear. To Patricia, the idea that Marcus could harbor a dark, violent side, let alone wish harm upon her beloved daughter, was an absolute impossibility. Yet, any maternal protests evaporated the moment detectives asked Patricia for the phone number she had saved for Marcus in her own contacts. The investigators punched the digits into their system and ran a cross-check against Ebony's phone logs. It was an exact, undeniable match. The man saved in Ebony's phone as Bay, the man who had exchanged a flurry of frantic text messages with her right up until the hour of her death, and then gone utterly, deafeningly silent, was Marcus Murphy. The friendly neighbor, the trusted godson, the pillar of the naval community in Virginia, had suddenly vaulted into the crosshairs as the most dangerous man in the case. Houston detectives did not hesitate. Packing their files and securing cooperation from federal and military liaisons, they boarded a flight and headed east toward the Atlantic coast, touching down in Norfolk, Virginia. Their mission was clear. They needed to pierce the disciplined armor of the United States Navy and confront a man whose double life was about to be laid completely bare. The salt-kissed air of Norfolk, Virginia, carried the disciplined, orderly rhythm of the United States Navy, but the arrival of Houston homicide detectives injected an unmistakable current of urgency and danger into the coastal military hub. Stepping off the plane, the investigators knew they were entering unfamiliar territory. They were no longer navigating the sprawling, chaotic urban sprawl of Texas. They were stepping inside a world bound by military protocol, rank, chain of command, and institutional pride. Their immediate objective was to pierce that institutional armor and get straight to the source: Marcus Murphy's commanding officer. Walking into the administrative offices of the naval base, the detectives were met with an atmosphere of stark professionalism. When they laid out their badges and revealed the grim nature of their visit, investigating the brutal homicide of a 28-year-old mother, the reaction from Marcus's superior was a mixture of profound shock and protective disbelief. To his commanding officer, Marcus Murphy was not a loose cannon or a shadowy predator. He was a dedicated sailor who had served his country with distinction for several years. He was steadily climbing the ranks, taking his duties seriously, and viewed his career in the armed forces not merely as a paycheck, but as a calling. "He's a good man," the commander insisted, leaning back in his chair, trying to reconcile the smiling, dependable sailor in his personnel file with the cold-blooded monster the detectives were describing. He was making rank. He enjoyed being in the Navy. I can't imagine he'd ever be involved in something like this. Yet, detectives do not judge character by professional commendations or clean service records. They look for psychological anomalies, hidden stress fractures, and operational windows. They pressed the commanding officer for deeper behavioral insights. Is he manipulative? Does he exhibit anger or control issues behind closed doors? Has he ever shown aggressive tendencies that stood out among his peers? The commander shook his head thoughtfully. Nothing in Marcus's daily demeanor ever raised a red flag. He had passed his background checks with flying colors when he first enlisted, and throughout his tenure, he had maintained the expected decorum of a military professional, someone society naturally looks toward as a pillar of the community. Realizing that character assessments were getting them nowhere, the detectives pivoted to hard operational data. They needed to establish a timeline that could either anchor Marcus firmly to his post in Virginia, or place him dangerously close to a crime scene in Texas. The crucial question hung in the air. Was there any possible way Marcus could have slipped away from the base for several days without anyone noticing? The commanding officer was swift to dispel any notion of unchecked absenteeism. The Navy operates on a strict grid of accountability. Every sailor's whereabouts are monitored, accounted for, and meticulously documented through daily operational logs known as musters. We keep track of all our personnel, the commander stated firmly, standing up to retrieve a thick folder from a filing cabinet. He opened it and laid out a crisp, official document across the desk. This is our muster sheet. This tells us who is where on what days. With bated breath, the detectives leaned over the desk, their eyes scanning the columns of names, ranks, and duty statuses until they hit the date that mattered most. February 24, 2015. The exact day Ebony Harris was brutally slaughtered in her Houston apartment. The entry for Marcus Murphy on that specific date sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through the room. He was not on base. He was not locked down in barracks or tied to a ship. According to the official muster log, Officer Murphy was on authorized liberty. He had been granted a multi-day pass, giving him official time off duty stretching from February 24 through the 26th. The coincidence was too precise to be ignored, too volatile to be dismissed. The exact window of a 3-day naval leave aligned perfectly with the precise window of a murder thousands of miles away. Marcus Murphy vaulted instantly from a person of interest to suspect number 1. Armed with this explosive revelation, the detectives knew their next strategic move. They needed to contact Marcus directly, look into his digital eyes, and hear his side of the story before he realized the full weight of the net closing around him. There was only one logistical hurdle standing in their way. Marcus was not currently stationed in Virginia. He had recently been temporarily reassigned to Pensacola, Florida, for advanced training. Face-to-face interrogation in Norfolk was off the table, forcing the detectives to rely on the cold, disembodied medium of a telephone interview. Returning to their temporary command post, the detectives dialed his number. The phone rang a few times before a calm, steady masculine voice answered on the other end. "Mr. Murphy?" "Yeah," Marcus replied, his voice unhurried, carrying the smooth cadence of a man entirely comfortable in his own skin. The detectives introduced themselves, keeping their tones neutral, hiding the heavy artillery of evidence they had quietly amassed against him. Surprisingly, Marcus did not panic or slam down the receiver. Instead, he leaned into the conversation, readily and casually admitting that yes, he did know Ebony Harris. He acknowledged that they had hooked up on one of her visits up north to see her mother in Virginia. He spoke about their connection with a breezy familiarity, trying to frame it as a casual low-stakes fling. However, when the questioning steered toward the heavier realities of their relationship, specifically the fact that Ebony was pregnant, Marcus's smooth veneer began to fray. He carefully downplayed the magnitude of the pregnancy, sidestepping the deeper implications, and maintained an air of innocent detachment. Then came the critical question, the pivot point upon which the entire phone call rested. "Were you ever in Houston, Mr. Murphy?" Without missing a beat, without a micropause of hesitation, Marcus flatly denied it. "Never," he answered smoothly. "I've never been to your city." He offered up an alternative narrative of his 3-day leave to shore up his alibi. He claimed that during his time off, he had packed up his car and driven north to Danville, Virginia, specifically to pick up his son from his mother. The detectives played along, keeping their cards close to their chest. "So you were with your mom?" "Yeah," Marcus reiterated confidently. "So you were never in Houston that week?" "Never," he repeated, sealing his narrative with an airtight defense. Okay, well, that's all I really needed from you, the detective said calmly before terminating the call. On paper, Marcus's alibi seemed robust. If he was driving cross-country in Virginia to pick up his child, he couldn't possibly have committed a brutal homicide in a West Houston apartment halfway across the country. Following protocol, investigators placed a follow-up call to Marcus's mother in Danville. True to her son's word, she confirmed that Marcus had indeed shown up at her door on February 25 to collect his boy. It was a classic criminal sleight of hand, the truth used as a shield to hide a monstrous lie. Marcus had picked up his son in Virginia on the 25th. But what about the 24th? The timeline had a glaring 24-hour gap that a clever mind could easily exploit if they had the right resources. Marcus couldn't have driven to Houston and back in a matter of hours, but there was another far faster way to bridge the geographical divide. He could fly. Discarding the phone interviews, the Houston detectives bypassed local hearsay and turned directly to the multi-billion-dollar apparatus of modern commercial aviation. They issued emergency investigative subpoenas to major airlines, demanding passenger manifests and booking records for all flights into and out of the Texas hubs during the critical 48-hour window surrounding the murder. The digital dragnet yielded a smoking gun. Scrolling through the manifests, the investigators' eyes locked onto a passenger record dated February 24, 2015. Marcus Murphy had not stayed in Virginia. On the morning of the murder, he had walked up to a ticketing counter in Charlotte, North Carolina, paid for a commercial airline ticket, and boarded a flight straight to Houston, Texas. The flight path was laid out in undeniable black and white. Marcus had flown into Houston on the exact day Ebony Harris was slaughtered, spent a handful of hours on Texas soil, and then boarded a return flight back east, completing a whirlwind, lethal round trip executed entirely in secret. To ensure the airline manifest wasn't a bizarre clerical coincidence or a case of identity theft, detectives pulled his cell phone tower pings for that same 24-hour period. The digital data aligned with terrifying precision. The cell tower pings traced his device moving across Houston airspace, hitting local towers right in the vicinity of Ebony's apartment complex on the day of the murder. The illusion of innocence was shattered. The trusted godson, the disciplined sailor, the polite neighbor had executed a calculated, cross-country hit. With the evidence locked down and verified, the Houston Police Department secured an immediate, ironclad warrant for Marcus Murphy's arrest on charges of murder. The bureaucratic machinery moved with swift, merciless efficiency. Federal law enforcement and local authorities in Pensacola, Florida, were alerted. Before Marcus could finish his advanced training assignment, his military routine was violently interrupted. Law enforcement officers descended upon him at the Florida Naval Base, placing him in heavy steel handcuffs. He was taken into custody without incident, stripped of his liberty, and held securely in a Florida detention facility, awaiting emergency extradition back to the state of Texas to face the full wrath of the law. Back in Houston, the detectives who had chased ghosts across digital phone logs, airline manifests, and military musters prepared for the final phase of their battle. They packed their files, boarded a return flight down to Florida, and marched into the interrogation room where Marcus Murphy sat waiting. It was time to strip away the sailor's uniform, dismantle the charming facade, and force a cornered predator to look into the eyes of the men who had dismantled his web of lies piece by piece. The fluorescent lights of the Florida interrogation room hummed with a low, oppressive drone, casting a sterile glare over the metal table where Marcus Murphy sat. Stripped of his naval uniform and the disciplined structure of base life, the young sailor now wore the heavy, inescapable weight of an accused killer. Yet, as the Houston homicide detectives pushed open the door and took their seats across from him, Marcus did not project the panic or jittery desperation of a cornered man. Instead, he leaned back in his chair with an unsettling, almost theatrical ease, wearing the calm, untroubled expression of someone who believed his intelligence could outmaneuver the law. At first, the conversation flowed with a deceptive, conversational politeness. Marcus was open, smiling lightly, acting as if he didn't have a care in the world, a man simply having a casual chat with old acquaintances over a cup of coffee. He played the part of the cooperative bystander, maintaining a veneer of supreme confidence that suggested he thought the police were grasping at straws. The detectives let him talk, watching his micro-expressions, studying how his eyes flickered when they maintained steady eye contact. They allowed him to lean comfortably into his narrative, building his own little house of cards brick by brick, before they finally decided to pull the rug out from underneath him. Without raising their voices, the detectives dropped the hammer. They slid the printed airline passenger manifests and the commercial booking records directly across the center of the metal table, followed closely by the digital cell tower location logs, placing his phone squarely in Houston on the exact day of the murder. The casual smile froze on Marcus's face. The relaxed posture stiffened. For a split second, the polished armor of his absolute denial cracked open, revealing a flash of genuine panic in his eyes as he realized the cross-country deception he had so carefully orchestrated had been completely dismantled by cold, hard data. Recognizing that his flat-out denial of ever setting foot in Texas was no longer tenable in the face of absolute proof, Marcus underwent an instantaneous tactical shift. The charming, carefree sailor vanished, replaced by a man frantically spinning a brand new, highly calculated story designed to salvage whatever innocence he had left. "Yes, I was in Texas," Marcus admitted, his voice dropping an octave, shedding the defiant bravado of moments before. He leaned forward, adopting a tone of wounded altruism, as if he were the misunderstood victim of a terrible misunderstanding. Yes, he flew to Houston. Yes, he went to Ebony's apartment. But his presence there, according to Marcus, was entirely benign, born out of noble intentions and pure self-sacrifice. He claimed that he had made the grueling cross-country journey simply to help a woman in need. He told investigators that during their previous communications, Ebony had dropped a bombshell. She was pregnant with twins, she was struggling deeply with her finances, and she was drowning under the stress of single motherhood. Marcus claimed that his flight down to Texas was a mercy mission. He insisted he had flown all the way from North Carolina just to hand-deliver $300 in cash to help her stay afloat. "This is pretty much who I am," Marcus argued, his voice dripping with an insincere, martyr-like sincerity. "I give every dime I have to someone who doesn't. I always have, I always will." The detectives listened to his melodramatic defense with cold, professional skepticism, recognizing the glaring logical fallacies, gaping holes in his self-serving narrative. It made zero rational sense. Why would a man spend hundreds of hard-earned dollars purchasing last-minute commercial airline tickets to fly halfway across the country just to hand over $300 in cash? A simple transaction that could have been executed instantly via a digital bank transfer or wire service in a matter of seconds. The explanation was insultingly flimsy, a desperate fairy tale constructed to mask a much darker reality. Pushing past his hollow excuses, detectives forced Marcus to walk them step by step through his timeline of that fatal day. Once he arrived at Ebony's apartment, Marcus claimed that when he walked through the threshold of her home, Ebony was getting ready to start her day. She was preparing to take a shower and head off to work. But hunger, he claimed, intervened. "I hadn't eaten anything all day," Marcus stated, painting a vivid picture of domestic mundanity. He told the investigators that he decided to walk out of the apartment to grab a bite to eat at a nearby local restaurant, operating under the clear assumption that Ebony would meet him there as soon as she finished getting dressed and stepped out of the shower. Except she never showed up. Marcus claimed he sat at the restaurant waiting, watching the clock tick forward, growing increasingly annoyed as the minutes bled into hours. When he tried calling her phone, his calls went unanswered. Frustrated and pressed for time, he decided to walk back to the apartment complex to see what was holding her up. "I went back. I knocked on the door. She didn't come to the door," Marcus recounted, his voice steady, attempting to project the mild annoyance of an ignored visitor rather than the panic of a murderer. And then, according to Marcus, fate intervened once more, providing him with a convenient, automated excuse to flee the scene. "By this time, my phone's alarming me that it's time for me to go back to the airport." With his return flight looming, Marcus claimed he simply assumed Ebony had left early for work or gotten caught up in her busy schedule. Without knocking harder, without checking windows, without sounding any further alarms, he hailed a cab, rode back to the airport, and boarded his flight back to North Carolina, leaving the apartment behind in absolute silence. He claimed that it wasn't until he was safely back on the East Coast, after Ebony's mother received the horrifying news that her daughter had been found slaughtered, that he learned what had happened. He expressed theatrical shock, but immediately pivoted back to self-preservation. He openly admitted to investigators that his first thought upon hearing of her death wasn't grief for the woman he claimed to care about, but raw panic over how his secret trip to Houston would look to the authorities. "I knew it made me look guilty," he muttered, playing the victim of bad timing. The detectives stared at him across the table, unimpressed by his theatrical performance. They knew that every word coming out of his mouth was a carefully tailored half-truth, designed to bridge the gap between undeniable evidence and capital murder. But before they concluded the interrogation, they had one final crucial thread to pull. A thread that would shatter the illusion that Marcus had acted entirely alone. While Marcus was spinning his tales in Florida, investigators back on the home front had turned their attention to the periphery of his life, specifically targeting his serious, long-term girlfriend Brianna Wright. When detectives first tracked down Brianna and sat her down for an interview, the revelation that her boyfriend had been maintaining a secret, romantic entanglement with a woman in Texas hit her like a physical blow. Brianna was utterly stunned, her world instantly upended by the realization of Marcus's profound betrayal. But shock rapidly curdled into a cold, hard desire for the absolute truth. Determined to uncover the full extent of his deception, Brianna offered the detectives something invaluable. She took it upon herself to log directly into Marcus's personal email account, diving straight into his digital travel archives to locate the exact flight itinerary he had tried to keep hidden from the world. She pulled up the confirmation records and handed the digital trail over to the police. But as she scanned the passenger details alongside the detectives, a terrifying detail emerged that blew the investigation wide open. Marcus Murphy had not made that secretive, lethal trip to Houston alone. According to the official airline reservation and the booking manifests, Marcus had purchased 2 tickets. He had brought a companion with him on his cross-country mission, his own cousin, a young man named Ricky. The discovery transformed the scope of the case instantly. Who was Ricky? What role did he play in the brutal execution of Ebony Harris? Was he an active, conscious accomplice who stood guard while Marcus wielded the knife? Or was he an unwitting pawn dragged across state lines under false pretenses? Armed with this explosive new piece of the puzzle, Houston detectives immediately shifted their crosshairs eastward once again, preparing to descend upon Virginia to bring Ricky in for questioning. The net was tightening, the walls were closing in, and the true chilling depth of Marcus Murphy's conspiracy was about to be dragged violently out into the light, leaving the sailor with nowhere left to hide. The revelation that Marcus Murphy had not traveled to Texas alone blew open a brand new, highly volatile chapter in the investigation. If Marcus had executed a calculated, cross-country trip to snuff out the life of a 28-year-old mother, the presence of a second person meant there was a live witness, and potentially an active accomplice, who had crossed state lines right alongside him. Houston detectives wasted no time. Leaving Marcus locked securely in his holding cell, they pivoted their focus northward, returning once again to the familiar coastal terrain of Virginia. Their target was Marcus's cousin Ricky, the man whose name had appeared right beside Marcus's on the commercial airline booking itinerary on that fateful February day in 2015. Locating Ricky was not difficult, but bringing him in for a formal interview carried a heavy charge of anticipation. The investigators knew they were walking into a delicate psychological space. Ricky was not a hardened military man accustomed to high-stakes interrogations. He was a young man caught in the terrifying orbit of a family member's monstrous crime. When Ricky was brought into the interview room at a local precinct, the physical space seemed to shrink under the weight of the tension. The detectives did not waste time with small talk or slow, winding introductions. They placed him directly in the hot seat, setting the tone with a stark, blunt question designed to strip away any initial impulse to lie. "Why do you think we're talking to you?" the lead investigator asked, his eyes locked onto Ricky's face, watching for the first micro-shiver of anxiety. Ricky swallowed hard, his posture slumping slightly as the reality of the situation settled over him. His voice, when he finally spoke, carried the hesitant, nervous cadence of someone realizing he was in over his head. "Because we were in Texas someday, and she was hanged, and got murdered." The phrasing was clumsy, but the core admission was undeniable. Ricky knew why they were there. He knew they were looking at the Houston trip, and he knew a woman had died. The detectives leaned forward, opening up the floor for Ricky to tell his side of the story, watching closely to see whether he would play the role of a blind accomplice or a terrified dupe. According to Ricky, the entire journey had materialized out of a sudden, casual phone call from his cousin. Marcus had called him up out of the blue the day before they left, spinning a seemingly harmless logistical excuse. He claimed he had 2 non-refundable airline tickets that were otherwise going to waste, and he needed someone to accompany him on a quick trip. Ricky claimed he had no idea where they were actually heading until they were already in motion. When pressed about their preparations, Ricky insisted they traveled light, carrying almost nothing with them except for a single carry-on bag belonging entirely to Marcus. "Did you ask him what was in that bag?" The detective pressed sharply, the air in the room growing tense. Ricky shook his head, his eyes darting defensively. He maintained that before they left that night, Marcus kept the details vague. He told Ricky only that he wanted to see a woman he knew down south, framing it as a casual, friendly visit rather than a premeditated execution. According to Ricky's timeline, the journey was a blur of connections and transit. They boarded their flight, endured a layover in Atlanta, and eventually touched down in Houston, Texas. Once they stepped off the plane, they hailed a cab, riding through the sprawling urban grid until they arrived at the quiet West Houston apartment complex where Ebony lived. It was at that critical juncture, right outside the threshold of Ebony's home, that Ricky's narrative took a bizarre, detached turn. He claimed that when they arrived, he had no intention of inserting himself into whatever private business Marcus needed to handle. Deciding to give his cousin space, Ricky opted to hang back. He told detectives that he simply walked away from the apartment complex, wandered down to a nearby local restaurant, and sat down to get something to eat by himself, completely oblivious to the nightmare unfolding just blocks away. After spending time killing hours at the restaurant, Ricky claimed he met back up with Marcus. Without a word of explanation, without any visible signs of distress, blood, or panic, the 2 cousins took a cab back to the airport, boarded their return flight, and flew straight back home to Virginia. Ricky swore up and down that Marcus never told him what had happened inside that apartment. He claimed he remained completely in the dark, an innocent bystander who had merely tagged along for a free flight and a quick meal, blissfully unaware that he had been an unwitting shadow to a cold-blooded murder. For the detective sitting across the table, Ricky's story sounded absurdly convenient, the classic defense of a man desperately trying to distance himself from a capital murder charge. It strained all logic that a cousin would fly halfway across the country on a moment's notice without asking deeper questions, sit at a restaurant for hours while a murder was being committed, and return home without sensing anything amiss. Yet, as the investigators weighed their options, they faced a harsh legal reality. While Ricky's narrative sounded deeply suspicious, they lacked the hard forensic smoking gun required to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that he had knowledge of the plot or actively participated in the attack. The physical evidence at the crime scene, the DNA, the struggle, the brutal execution, all pointed squarely at one man, Marcus Murphy. Ultimately, the decision was made. No criminal charges were filed against Ricky. The police and the district attorney's office made a strategic choice, focusing their limited resources and absolute legal firepower on building an impenetrable, airtight case against the primary architect of the crime, rather than muddying the waters with a secondary suspect they couldn't securely pin down. Ricky was allowed to walk out of the precinct, leaving the heavy lifting of justice entirely to the impending courtroom battle. Back in the secure vaults of the forensic laboratories, the final undeniable pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place. The physical evidence collected from the crime scene had been undergoing rigorous, meticulous testing, and the results were about to deliver the absolute, definitive nail in the coffin for Marcus Murphy. When the DNA lab results were officially finalized and handed over to the lead detectives, the findings were staggering. Investigators had recovered trace biological evidence from underneath Ebony Harris's fingernails, silent, microscopic testimony left behind during her final, desperate moments of life as she fought back against her attacker with everything she had. The lab ran the genetic profile against their database, comparing it directly to the DNA swab collected from Marcus Murphy. It was a flawless, undeniable match. The DNA found beneath Ebony's fingernails belonged to Marcus Murphy. It was the ultimate scientific proof, obliterating any lingering fairy tales about a peaceful visit, a dropped-off envelope of cash, or a misunderstood mercy mission. It proved beyond the shadow of a doubt that Marcus was the man inside that apartment, the man who grappled with her, the man who pinned her down, and the man she fought with every ounce of her strength before her life was extinguished. Yet, even as science sealed Marcus's fate regarding the physical struggle, the DNA results dropped one final, startling twist that sent a ripple of shock through the investigative team. In addition to processing the evidence for the murder trial, the lab had also completed the paternity testing on the biological samples extracted from the unborn twins Ebony had been carrying at the time of her death. For months, investigators and surviving family members had wrestled with the question of who fathered the children. Was it Tavon? Was it Cedric? Or was it Marcus? The DNA data brought a definitive, humbling answer. Another gentleman entirely was the biological father of her twins, and it was conclusively not Marcus Murphy. For the detectives and Ebony's grieving family, that final revelation added a tragic, heartbreaking layer to an already senseless crime. Ebony had been killed in a frenzy of violent paranoia, driven by a man terrified of exposure and responsibility, yet the biological reality of the children she carried didn't even match the twisted narrative he had feared. It was a staggering reminder of the profound emptiness of the violence that had shattered a family. With the DNA match locked in, the airline manifests verified, the digital cell tower pings mapped, and the flight itineraries exposed, the case against Marcus Murphy was a titanium fortress. There was no escape, no clever legal loophole, and no more hiding behind the disciplined uniform of the United States Navy. However, translating that airtight case into final courtroom justice was about to face a massive, unprecedented hurdle. A tragedy of this magnitude demands a public reckoning, a formal trial where a jury of peers can look a murderer in the eye and deliver accountability. But the wheels of justice do not always turn at the speed desired by grieving families. Just as the case was primed to move toward trial, the world was brought to an abrupt, screeching halt by an invisible global crisis. The COVID-19 pandemic swept across the nation, forcing courthouses to lock their doors, shutting down judicial systems, and plunging the legal timeline into an indefinite state of limbo. For Ebony Harris's family, who had already endured years of quiet agony, chasing down cross-country leads and waiting for answers, the pandemic meant an excruciating, heartbreaking extension of their purgatory. They had already waited years for the truth to surface. Now they were forced to sit in agonizing patience, waiting for the doors of the courthouse to finally swing open so they could face the man who stole their daughter, their sister, and their mother away from them forever. The heavy oak doors of the Texas courtroom finally swung open in November of 2022, ending an excruciating 7-year purgatory of waiting for the family of Ebony Harris. For nearly a decade, a grieving mother, heartbroken siblings, and 2 young boys growing up without a mother had carried the silent, suffocating weight of an unresolved nightmare. The global paralysis of the COVID-19 pandemic had locked down courthouses, shuttered judicial systems, and forced a family desperate for closure to stand by helplessly as time dragged on. But patience, no matter how agonizing, eventually collides with the unyielding machinery of justice. Now standing trial in a Houston courtroom for the brutal murder of 28-year-old Ebony Harris was Marcus Murphy. The gravity of the charges against him went far beyond standard homicide. Because the medical examiner's autopsy had definitively established that Ebony was almost 6 weeks pregnant with twins at the time of her slaughter, prosecutors pursued a charge of capital murder. Under Texas law, taking the life of an individual while knowing she is pregnant elevates the crime, holding the perpetrator legally accountable for the destruction of multiple lives. It was a charge that carried the heaviest possible stakes, placing Marcus squarely in the crosshairs of a potential life sentence without the possibility of parole, or worse. As the trial commenced, the courtroom fell into a tense, breathless silence. The prosecution stepped forward to deliver their opening statement, laying out a narrative that wasn't just about a murder, but about a terrifying psychological descent into panic, self-preservation, and unmitigated rage. The state argued that the entire catalyst for the bloodshed was Ebony's pregnancy. In the weeks leading up to her death, Ebony had reached out to Marcus, informing him that she was carrying twins and that she believed he was the father. To the outside world, Marcus Murphy was a disciplined sailor, a pillar of his community, a man who wore a uniform of honor and maintained a stable life with his long-term girlfriend, Brianna, and their children up in Virginia. But beneath that polished, professional exterior lay a man terrified of the consequences of his own actions. The prosecution painted a vivid, chilling portrait of a coward driven entirely by fear. Marcus realized that if the truth came to light, if his secret cross-country affair exploded into public view, if his commanding officers, his friends, and most importantly, his girlfriend Brianna discovered the reality of his double life, his carefully constructed world would collapse instantly. He wasn't willing to face the fallout. He wasn't willing to step up, take responsibility, or deal with the messy complications of fatherhood. Instead, in the dark, calculated corners of his mind, he made a monstrous calculation. The easiest way to erase a liability was to erase the person carrying it. Step by step, the state walked the jury through the meticulous execution of his plan. They presented the airline passenger manifest showing Marcus purchasing a last-minute ticket out of Charlotte, North Carolina, boarding a commercial flight straight to Houston on February 24, 2015, and bringing his cousin Ricky along as an unwitting shadow. They mapped out his digital cell tower pings, tracking his physical movement from the airport straight to the West Houston apartment complex where Ebony lived her final moments. And then, the prosecution presented the undeniable scientific bedrock of their case, the physical evidence recovered from the crime scene. They displayed the forensic lab reports detailing the microscopic biological material pulled from underneath Ebony's fingernails, the silent, desperate testimony of a young mother fighting tooth and nail for her life against an attacker she knew and trusted. When the jury looked at the DNA profile match belonging to Marcus Murphy, the illusion of his innocent, dropped-off cash mercy mission completely dissolved. Throughout the presentation of the evidence, Marcus sat at the defense table, watching the proceedings with a cool, detached composure, attempting to maintain the same aura of untouchable confidence he had tried to project in the Florida interrogation room years earlier. But the armor of his stoicism was crumbling under the weight of irrefutable facts. The witnesses called to the stand, detectives, forensic specialists, grieving family members, and betrayed loved ones, wove an inescapable tapestry of guilt that no clever defense attorney could unravel. When the trial reached its culmination and the jury retired to deliberate, the deliberation room did not echo with doubt or confusion. The evidence was simply too massive, too precise, and too scientifically absolute to ignore. The jury returned with their verdict, reading it aloud into the quiet electric stillness of the courtroom. Guilty. Marcus Murphy was convicted of capital murder. The sentence handed down brought a definitive, legal period to a tragedy that had haunted a family for 7 long years. Marcus was condemned to spend the rest of his natural life behind bars, stripped of his rank, his freedom, and his ability to ever walk freely among society again. The man who had flown halfway across the country to silence a mother and her unborn children was finally brought to a permanent, unyielding stop. Yet, as the gavels fell and the courtroom slowly emptied, the true legacy of the case settled over those who loved Ebony best. Justice in a courtroom does not have the power to reverse the hands of time. It cannot bring back a young mother's infectious laughter, her passion for music, or the fierce, unyielding resilience with which she fought every single day to give her 2 young boys a better life. Sitting in the aftermath of the verdict, Ebony's family looked back across the long, grueling years of investigation, false leads, cross-country flights, pandemic delays, and courtroom battles. They remembered the vibrant fire that defined her spirit, the way she could find humor in the darkest seasons, and how she never backed down from a challenge, no matter how steep the climb. Her life had been violently cut short by a man whose cowardice eclipsed his humanity. But her story, the story of a devoted mother who fought like hell for her survival, would not be buried in the cold statistics of a violent city. It remained a haunting, powerful reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind a polite smile, and the relentless, unbreakable love of a family that refused to let her memory fade into the shadows. The final chapter of any true crime story is rarely defined by the satisfying snap of handcuffs or the echoing bang of a judge's gavel. While the courtroom victory in November 2022 brought a formal, legal end to the harrowing ordeal, justice in a court of law is merely a mechanical tool. It is an institutional instrument designed to punish the offender, but it possesses no magical properties to heal the deep, jagged scars left in the hearts of the survivors. For the family of Ebony Harris, the conclusion of Marcus Murphy's trial did not signal an instant of peaceful closure. Instead, it opened the door to a quiet, profound space of reflection. a sacred space where the noise of the investigation faded away, leaving only the memory of a remarkable young woman whose life was extinguished far too soon. When the media vans pulled away from the courthouse, and the public spectators dispersed back into their daily lives, Ebony's family was left to face the true, unvarnished reality of their loss. 7 long years had passed since that chilly Wednesday afternoon in February 2015, when an exterminator walked into a West Houston apartment and stumbled upon a nightmare. 7 years of wading through investigative dead ends, cross-country flights, bureaucratic hurdles, and the agonizing, unprecedented paralysis of a global pandemic that locked down the judicial system. Throughout that entire eternity, the family had carried the crushing weight of an unanswered question. Why? Why would a man take a commercial flight halfway across the country, arriving with malice hidden beneath a polite facade, to brutally cut down a mother of 2? The trial provided the mechanical answer: fear of exposure, the cowardice of a man unwilling to face the messy, beautiful realities of responsibility, and a twisted desire for self-preservation. But sitting in the heavy silence that followed the verdict, those clinical explanations felt painfully hollow. No motive, no matter how calculated or complex, could ever justify the destruction of a human life, let all the lives that were snuffed out in that single apartment. Ebony had not just been an individual caught in the crossfire of a toxic secret. She was a daughter, a sister, a cousin, and above all, a devoted mother whose entire universe revolved around her 2 little boys. As the echoes of the trial faded, the focus inevitably shifted toward those 2 boys, the innocent survivors left standing in the wreckage of a brutal crime. When police first swarmed Ebony's apartment on the day of her murder, one of the most terrifying, heart-stopping questions haunting the investigators was simple and urgent. Where are the children? The immediate panic of wondering if they had been abducted by the killer, or left alone and terrified in the dark, mirrored the helpless terror of the family members who rushed to the scene. Though those boys were ultimately found safe, tucked away with relatives who stepped up to wrap them in protective, loving arms, their lives had been altered in a way no child should ever have to endure. Growing up without a mother is an insurmountable mountain to climb. Every milestone, every school graduation, every birthday, and every quiet moment of doubt would forever be shadowed by the ghost of a tragedy they were too young to fully comprehend when it occurred. Yet, in the face of such devastating loss, the family made a conscious, unyielding choice. They would not let Ebony's legacy be defined solely by the manner of her death. They refused to let her memory be reduced to a grim statistic in Houston's endless ledger of homicides, or a cold case file gathering dust in a police precinct archive. Instead, they chose to remember the vibrant, indomitable spirit that defined her every single day. Those who knew and loved Ebony best remembered her as a force of nature, a woman whose personality was nothing short of magnetic. She possessed a fierce, burning passion for music, often filling her space with melodies that carried her hopes and dreams upward. Her voice, whether raised in song or speaking truth to hardship, had a unique power to lift the spirits of those around her. And then there was her humor, that legendary razor-sharp wit that could slice through the darkest, most suffocating moments of despair. Ebony was the kind of person who could find a way to laugh, even when the world felt like it was crumbling, using that laughter as a shield to protect her children, and a beacon to guide her family through rough waters. Her life had not been an easy road. Thrust into the unforgiving world of motherhood at just 17 years old, she had faced the crushing weight of early adversity without flinching. While others might have folded under the pressure of single parenthood, unreliable jobs, and broken relationships, Ebony treated failure not as an option, but as a forbidden concept. She fought her way through every obstacle with a grit and resilience that commanded respect. She worked long, grueling hours at a shipping company, pushing past physical and mental exhaustion, driven by a singular, beautiful obsession to provide a safe, loving, stable life for her sons. Every drop of sweat, every late-night worry, and every sacrifice she made was poured unconditionally into them. It was that very resilience, that fierce, protective instinct of a mother fighting to secure a future for her family, that made her tragic end so profoundly painful. She had dared to hope for a better tomorrow, making plans to move up to Virginia, surrounded by her mother and extended family, ready to turn the page and start fresh with a home daycare. She was standing right on the threshold of a new beginning, feeling the first promising winds of momentum pushing her forward, when a cowardly predator tore her world apart. Yet, as the years rolled on and the legal battle finally reached its definitive conclusion, a deeper truth began to settle over the family and everyone touched by the case. Evil is loud, destructive, and consumed by its own cowardice, but it is ultimately fragile. Marcus Murphy attempted to erase Ebony Harris from the earth, believing that silence could be purchased with airline tickets, hidden itineraries, and calculated lies. But he failed to realize something fundamental: love outlasts violence. The truth cannot be permanently buried beneath cross-country flights or deceitful alibis. The story of Ebony Harris is not simply a dark true crime narrative about a brutal murder in a West Houston apartment complex. It is a testament to the unyielding power of maternal love, the relentless dedication of detectives who refused to let a cold trail stay cold, and a family that stood shoulder to shoulder across 7 agonizing years, demanding accountability from a system that tested their patience to its absolute limits. When we reflect on cases like Ebony's, the true lesson lies not in morbid fascination with the mechanics of a crime, but in the deliberate preservation of humanity. It is about looking past the police tape, the case numbers, and the courtroom drama to see the beating heart of the person who was lost. Ebony Harris deserved to watch her sons grow into men. She deserved to see her dreams of a quiet, stable life realized. She deserved to laugh through the hard times and celebrate the good ones, surrounded by the family she loved so fiercely. Though her life was violently cut short, the fire that burned inside her, that magnetic personality, that unbreakable resilience, and that fierce protective love for her boys, remains entirely unquenched. It lives on in the memories of her mother, her cousins, her siblings, and most importantly, in the lives of the 2 young men who carry her blood in their veins. The darkness did not win. The secrets were dragged out into the harsh, unforgiving light of day. And as the final chapter closes on this tragic chapter of human history, Ebony Harris is remembered not as a victim, but as a fighter, a mother who loved without reservation, and a spirit that Houston, and those who fought for her, will never ever forget. The final quiet echoes of a true crime saga rarely linger in the dramatic showdown of a courtroom, or the solemn delivery of a life sentence. Once the gavel falls, the media vans depart, and the public eye shifts to the next harrowing headline. A profound and heavy silence settles over the landscape. For the family of Ebony Harris, the official conclusion of Marcus Murphy's capital murder trial in November 2022 marked the end of a grueling 7-year judicial marathon, but it did not magically erase the absence carved into their daily lives. Justice, in all its institutional precision, is a mechanism of the state. It can lock away a monster behind impenetrable bars of steel and concrete, but it cannot stitch back together the shattered heart of a mother who outlived her daughter, nor can it return a mother's embrace to 2 growing boys. As the dust settled on the trial and the exhausting machinery of the legal system finally powered down, the family was left standing in the sacred, fragile space of pure remembrance. They were no longer forced to relive the graphic details of the autopsy reports, analyze airline manifests, or parse through the deceitful testimonies of a cornered killer. Instead, they were left alone with the memories of who Ebony Harris truly was before her name became a tragic entry in the endless ledger of Houston's homicide statistics. In that quiet aftermath, the true essence of the story emerged, not as a narrative defined solely by brutality and cowardice, but as an enduring testament to a young woman's unbreakable spirit, her fierce devotion as a mother, and the profound resilience of a family that refused to let her memory fade into the dark. To truly understand the weight of what was lost on that chilly February afternoon in 2015, one must look far beyond the confines of the West Houston apartment, where her life was violently cut short. Ebony was not merely a victim of circumstance. She was a vibrant force of nature. Those who knew her best remembered her as a woman possessing a magnetic, radiant personality that naturally drew people into her orbit. She loved music with a fierce, unapologetic passion, often using song as both an outlet for her dreams and a sanctuary from the grinding pressures of everyday life. Her voice carried the quiet hopes of someone striving to build a better, brighter future for her children. Yet, perhaps her greatest and most defining gift was her incredible sense of humor. Even when life conspired against her, dealing her difficult hands and pushing her to her physical and emotional limits, Ebony possessed a legendary wit. She was the kind of person who could find a way to laugh through the absolute worst of times, using that laughter as a shield to protect her boys and a beacon to warm the hearts of everyone around her. She didn't just endure hardship, She metabolized it, transforming pain into perseverance. Her journey had never been an easy one. Thrust into the unforgiving world of motherhood at the tender age of 17, Ebony had to grow up overnight. While many teenagers would have faltered under the crushing weight of such sudden, profound responsibility, Ebony stepped up without hesitation. When the father of her first child proved unequal to the monumental task of family life and drifted away, Ebony did not break. She embraced single motherhood with an unyielding tenacity, treating failure not as a regrettable possibility, but as a forbidden concept. She knew that her son depended entirely on her strength, so she forged ahead, securing a job at a shipping company and grinding through long, grueling hours just to put food on the table and a secure roof over his head. Years later, when she met Tavon and later welcomed a second son into the world, a golden season of genuine hope entered her life. For a fleeting time, her vision of a stable, complete family felt like a tangible reality. But as life so often proves unpredictable and cruel, that relationship ultimately fractured as well, plunging Ebony back into the demanding trenches of single parenthood. Yet, even in the darkest, most stressful moments, juggling unreliable childcare, facing the threat of losing her job if she missed another shift, and bearing the heavy emotional toll of isolation, she never stopped fighting. Her mother, Patricia Buffalo, watching from hundreds of miles away in Virginia, remained a constant, unbreakable anchor. Together, mother and daughter had charted a hopeful, concrete escape route. Ebony and her boys were going to pack up their lives and move north, starting fresh with a family-run home daycare, surrounded by relatives who loved and cherished them. She was standing right on the threshold of that bright, promising new chapter. She could feel the faint, uplifting winds of momentum finally pushing her forward. And it was precisely at that moment of vulnerability and transition that a cowardly predator crossed her threshold. Marcus Murphy, driven by a toxic mix of panic, fear of exposure, and an unwillingness to face the messy realities of responsibility, shattered her world in a frenzy of unmitigated violence. He believed that by ending her life, he could erase the consequences of his own choices, burying his double life beneath cross-country flights, hidden itineraries, and calculated lies. He fundamentally miscalculated the human spirit. Marcus could steal her breath, but he could not extinguish her legacy. He could buy an airline ticket to Texas, but he could never outrun the relentless, unyielding machinery of truth. Through the tireless dedication of homicide detectives who chased digital ghosts across phone records, cell tower pings, and flight manifests, through the cold, undeniable science of DNA profiling left behind under her fingernails during her desperate, heroic fight for survival, and through the unwavering determination of a family that endured 7 agonizing years of pandemic delays and courtroom battles, the darkness was dragged completely into the unforgiving light of day. The capital murder conviction and the life sentence handed down in November 2022 served as a definitive legal period to Marcus Murphy's crimes. He was stripped of his naval rank, his freedom, and his ability to ever walk among civilized society again. But the true victory of that courtroom battle was not merely punitive. It was restorative. It ensured that Ebony Harris would never be remembered as a forgotten statistic, but as a fighter, a devoted mother who battled fiercely for her life, and whose story exposed the fragile, hollow cowardice of a killer. As the years continue to march forward, the legacy of Ebony Harris lives on most vividly in the lives of her 2 sons. Though they were forced to navigate their formative years carrying the heavy, unimaginable burden of losing their mother to a senseless act of violence, they are surrounded by the protective, unconditional love of a family that ensures her memory is never more than a heartbeat away. They grow up knowing that their mother was a woman of immense courage, a resilient soul who never backed down from a challenge, and who poured every single ounce of her being into loving them. The story of Ebony Harris stands as a haunting, powerful reminder of the darkness that can occasionally lurk behind a polite smile and a disciplined uniform. But above all, it remains a radiant monument to the enduring power of love. Violence is loud, destructive, and ultimately fleeting, but love, true, fierce, maternal love, outlasts every storm. The secrets were uncovered, the lies were dismantled, and justice was finally delivered. And as the final chapter closes on this tragic yet inspiring human history, Ebony Harris is remembered not by how her life was ended, but by how fiercely, beautifully, and courageously she lived it. The final page of a true crime narrative is never truly blank. Even when the gavel has fallen, the prison doors have slammed shut, and the public outcry has faded into a distant murmur. For the family of Ebony Harris, the resolution delivered by the Houston courtroom in November 2022 marked the end of a grueling 7-year pursuit of accountability, but it served as a permanent beginning for a different kind of journey, the journey of carrying a legacy forward through the quiet, ordinary moments of everyday life. Justice can sentence a murderer to spend the rest of his natural life behind impenetrable walls of steel and concrete, but justice cannot fill the empty seat at a holiday dinner table. Nor can it wipe away the tears of a grieving mother who still reaches for a phone that will never ring again. When the cameras cleared and the media trucks departed, the true test of endurance began for Patricia Buffalo and the rest of Ebony's extended family. They were left to navigate a world that had fundamentally shifted on its axis nearly a decade prior, forced to reconcile the brutal, senseless reality of how Ebony was taken from them with the vibrant, radiant memory of who she actually was. In the silence that followed the legal victory, the family did not focus on the cold calculations of Marcus Murphy or the intricate web of lies he had spun across state lines. Instead, they wrapped themselves in the warmth of Ebony's spirit, choosing to honor her life not through the lens of her tragedy, but through the triumph of her unbreakable resilience. The core of that legacy rested entirely upon the shoulders of her 2 young sons, the boys for whom Ebony had sacrificed, struggled, and ultimately fought to her last breath. In the immediate aftermath of the murder, when first responders swarmed the West Houston apartment, one of the most terrifying, heart-wrenching questions gripping the investigators was the whereabouts of the children. The fear that they might have been taken by the killer or left stranded and terrified in the dark mirrored the agonizing panic of a family suddenly thrust into a nightmare. Though those boys were quickly located safe, sheltered by relatives who stepped up to wrap them in protective, unconditional love, the shadow of that loss was an inescapable part of their upbringing. Growing up without a mother is an insurmountable mountain, an uphill battle where every milestone, first days of school, graduations, birthdays, and quiet moments of teenage uncertainty, arrives with a subtle, hollow ache. Yet, the family ensured that those boys never walked in darkness. They grew up surrounded by stories of their mother's fierce courage, her legendary sense of humor, and her unwavering devotion. They learned that Ebony was not a woman who allowed life's hardships to defeat her. She was a fighter who viewed failure as a forbidden concept, working long, grueling hours at a shipping company, just to ensure they had a secure roof over their heads and food on the table. They learned that her laughter could slice through the darkest seasons, and that every single drop of sweat and tear she shed was poured unconditionally into building a better future for them. That fierce, maternal dedication became the guiding light for the family in the years following the trial. Patricia Buffalo, who had spent years advocating for her daughter, speaking with detectives, tracking court dates, and surviving a global pandemic that brought the judicial system to a screeching halt, channeled her grief into an enduring pillar of strength. She became the matriarch who held the family together, ensuring that Ebony's memory was not just preserved in photographs and quiet whispers, but lived out loud through acts of love, protection, and community support. The dream that Ebony never got to fulfill, creating a safe, stable, nurturing environment for children, echoed softly in the way her family rallied around her boys, raising them with the same fierce, protective grace that defined Ebony's entire existence. When we reflect on the harrowing journey that stretched from that chilly Wednesday afternoon in February 2015 to the courtroom verdict in late 2022, the true narrative transcends the standard tropes of a murder mystery. It is a profound study in the duality of human nature. On one side stood the dark, calculating cowardice of a man who believed he could erase human life to escape accountability, hiding behind a disciplined naval uniform and a web of cross-country flights. On the other side stood an unyielding wall of human tenacity. Homicide detectives who refused to let a digital trail go cold, forensic scientists who coaxed a silent confession from microscopic traces of DNA beneath a fingernail, and a family that stood shoulder to shoulder across 7 agonizing years, demanding truth from a system that tested their patience to its absolute limits. The contrast between those two forces serves as a timeless reminder of why stories like Ebony's must be told and remembered. True crime, at its absolute best, is not merely an exploration of violence or an exercise in macabre morbid curiosity. It is an act of reclamation. It is about stripping away the cold case numbers, the police blotters, and the clinical court documents to restore the full breathing humanity of the person who was lost. Ebony Harris was a daughter who loved her mother deeply, a sister who stayed connected across state lines, a friend whose magnetic personality lit up a room, and a devoted mother who gave everything she had to protect her children. She deserved to watch her sons grow into strong, compassionate men. She deserved to see her dreams of a fresh start in Virginia come to life. She deserved to grow old, surrounded by the laughter and warmth of the people she cherished. Though her future was violently and unjustly stolen by an act of cowardly malice, the fire that burned inside Ebony could not be extinguished. It survived the chilling silence of the crime scene, outlasted the cross-country lies of her killer, and persevered through years of legal delays and global crises. Her spirit lives on in the resilience of her family, in the laughter and growth of her sons, and in the collective memory of a community that witnessed what happens when ordinary people refuse to let darkness have the final word. The secrets were dragged out into the harsh, uncompromising light of day. The lies were thoroughly dismantled piece by piece. Justice was delivered, sealing a murderer away from the society he betrayed. But above all institutional rulings and courtroom gavels, the enduring legacy of Ebony Harris remains untouched by the violence that tried to end her story. She is remembered not as a victim defined by her final desperate moments, but as a warrior. A mother who loved without reservation, who fought with every ounce of her strength for her survival, and whose light continues to shine brightly across the lives of everyone she left behind. The final chapter of any profound true crime saga does not end with the slamming of prison doors, or the fading echoes of a courtroom gavel. While justice delivered in a court of law provides an essential institutional reckoning, locking away a violent predator for the rest of his natural life, it represents only a mechanical conclusion to a human tragedy. For the family of Ebony Harris, the passage of time following the November 2022 capital murder conviction marked the beginning of an ongoing sacred responsibility, ensuring that Ebony's true essence, her vibrant humanity, and her fierce maternal love are never overshadowed by the dark and cowardly act that tried to erase her. As the years continue to march forward, carrying society far beyond the chilling events of February 25, 2015, the landscape of grief has slowly transformed for those who loved her most. The frantic urgency of tracking cross-country flight manifests, analyzing cell tower pings, and enduring agonizing pandemic-related court delays has receded into the past. In its place stands a quiet, enduring reflection on a life lived with extraordinary courage, passion, and resilience. The family is no longer forced to dwell exclusively on the mechanics of a brutal crime. Instead, they can freely immerse themselves in the warmth of her memory, celebrating the remarkable woman who shaped their lives so deeply. At the absolute center of that ongoing legacy are Ebony's two young sons. The boys who once faced the terrifying, unimaginable reality of losing their mother at an early age are now growing, shaped by the protective, unconditional love of relatives who stepped up to wrap them in a secure embrace. Though the physical absence of their mother is a void that can never be entirely filled, they are never forced to navigate their paths in darkness. They are surrounded by living testaments to who Ebony was. A woman of indomitable spirit, razor-sharp wit, and unyielding strength. They grow up knowing that their mother did not merely endure hardship. She fought through it with every ounce of her being, working grueling hours at a shipping company, pushing past physical and mental exhaustion, driven by a singular, beautiful mission, to provide them with a safe, stable, and loving home. The family ensures that the boys understand the true depth of that sacrifice. They learn that Ebony was a magnetic force of nature, a person who loved music deeply and whose infectious laughter could slice through the darkest, most suffocating moments of despair. They learn that she viewed failure as a forbidden concept, treating every obstacle not as a wall, but as something to be climbed over or smashed through. That unyielding grit, that fierce protective instinct, is the greatest inheritance she left behind. A spiritual armor passed down to her sons to help them navigate the world with courage and dignity. For Patricia Buffalo, the mother who spent years carrying the unbearable grief of outliving her daughter while simultaneously acting as a relentless advocate for truth, the journey has evolved from a battle for justice into a mission of preservation. Patricia stood as the unbreakable anchor of the family through every dark turn of the investigation, refusing to let the trail go cold, demanding answers from detectives, and surviving a global crisis that tested her patience to its absolute limits. In the years following the trial, Her role has settled into that of a matriarch nurturing a garden of memories. She ensures that Ebony's name is spoken with fondness and pride, rather than just sorrow, keeping her spirit alive in family gatherings, quiet conversations, and the everyday milestones of her growing grandchildren. When we step back and look at the vast expanse of this narrative, stretching from the bustling streets of Houston, Texas, across the coastal military bases of Virginia, down to the holding cells of Florida, and finally into a Texas courtroom, the true power of the story lies in the contrast between darkness and light. Marcus Murphy operated under the delusion that human life could be treated as a disposable inconvenience, believing that a web of lies, last-minute airline tickets, and calculated silence could bury the consequences of his actions. He relied on the cowardice of secrecy, moving through the world with a polished exterior, while concealing a profound internal rot. Yet, his entire calculated conspiracy was systematically dismantled by the collective weight of human truth. Homicide detectives followed the digital breadcrumbs across state lines. Forensic scientists extracted silent, undeniable testimony from microscopic DNA left behind under a fingernail during a desperate, heroic fight for survival, and a family stood shoulder to shoulder across 7 grueling years, refusing to let the memory of a murdered mother fade into the shadows of an indifferent city. The triumph of that investigation proves an immutable truth. Violence is loud, destructive, and ultimately fragile, but truth and love are enduring. The story of Ebony Harris transcends the grim genre markers of true crime. It is not merely a clinical case study in homicide, nor is it an exercise in sensationalized tragedy. It is, at its core, a human story about the resilience of the human spirit. It is about a young woman who dreamed of a fresh start, who worked herself to the bone for her children, and who fought with every fiber of her being when confronted with unmitigated malice. Her life was violently and unjustly cut short, but her story cannot be contained by the violence that ended it. Every time her sons laugh with the same infectious humor that defined her personality, every time her family shares a story of her fierce determination, and every time someone remembers her not as a static victim, but as a dynamic, courageous fighter, Ebony lives on. The darkness that sought to consume her failed. The secrets were dragged mercilessly out into the unforgiving light of day. The lies were dismantled piece by piece, and justice was firmly delivered. As the final echoes of this harrowing chapter fade into history, Ebony Harris remains a luminous symbol of enduring maternal love. She is remembered not for how her life was tragically stolen, but for how fiercely, beautifully, and courageously she lived it. A warrior whose light continues to burn brightly, illuminating the paths of everyone she left behind, refusing to be forgotten by time or tide. The final chapter of any true crime journey does not conclude with the dramatic slamming of prison doors, or the finality of a courtroom gavel. While institutional justice is an essential mechanism, locking away a murderer behind impenetrable walls of steel and concrete, it represents only a structural reckoning. For the family of Ebony Harris, the passage of time following the November 2022 capital murder conviction marked the beginning of an ongoing sacred responsibility, ensuring that Ebony's true essence, her vibrant humanity, and her fierce maternal love are never overshadowed by the dark and cowardly act that tried to erase her. As the years continue to march forward, carrying society far beyond the chilling events of February 25, 2015, the landscape of grief has slowly transformed for those who loved her most. The frantic urgency of tracking cross-country flight manifests, analyzing cell tower pings, and enduring agonizing pandemic-related court delays has receded into the past. In its place stands a quiet, enduring reflection on a life lived with extraordinary courage, passion, and resilience. The family is no longer forced to dwell exclusively on the mechanics of a brutal crime. Instead, they can freely immerse themselves in the warmth of her memory, celebrating the remarkable woman who shaped their lives so deeply. At the absolute center of that ongoing legacy are Ebony's 2 young sons. The boys who once faced the terrifying, unimaginable reality of losing their mother at an early age are now growing, shaped by the protective, unconditional love of relatives who stepped up to wrap them in a secure embrace. Though the physical absence of their mother is a void that can never be entirely filled, they are never forced to navigate their paths in darkness. They are surrounded by living testaments to who Ebony was. A woman of indomitable spirit, razor-sharp wit, and unyielding strength. They grow up knowing that their mother did not merely endure hardship. She fought through it with every ounce of her being, working grueling hours at a shipping company, pushing past physical and mental exhaustion, driven by a singular beautiful mission: to provide them with a safe, stable, and loving home. The family ensures that the boys understand the true depth of that sacrifice. They learn that Ebony was a magnetic force of nature, a person who loved music deeply and whose infectious laughter could slice through the darkest, most suffocating moments of despair. They learn that she viewed failure as a forbidden concept, treating every obstacle not as a wall, but as something to be climbed over or smashed through. That unyielding grit, that fierce protective instinct, is the greatest inheritance she left behind. A spiritual armor passed down to her sons to help them navigate the world with courage and dignity. For Patricia Buffalo, the mother who spent years carrying the unbearable grief of outlived generations while simultaneously acting as a relentless advocate for truth, the journey has evolved from a battle for justice into a mission of preservation. Patricia stood as the unbreakable anchor of the family through every dark turn of the investigation, refusing to let the trail go cold, demanding answers from detectives, and surviving a global crisis that tested her patience to its absolute limits. In the years following the trial, her role has settled into that of a matriarch nurturing a garden of memories. She ensures that Ebony's name is spoken with fondness and pride, rather than just sorrow, keeping her spirit alive in family gatherings, quiet conversations, and the everyday milestones of her growing grandchildren. When we step back and look at the vast expanse of this narrative, stretching from the bustling streets of Houston, Texas, across the coastal military bases of Virginia, down to the holding cells of Florida, and finally into a Texas courtroom, the true power of the story lies in the contrast between darkness and light. Marcus Murphy operated under the delusion that human life could be treated as a disposable inconvenience, believing that a web of lies, last-minute airline tickets, and calculated silence could bury the consequences of his actions. He relied on the cowardice of secrecy, moving through the world with a polished exterior, while concealing a profound internal rot. Yet, his entire calculated conspiracy was systematically dismantled by the collective weight of human truth. Homicide detectives followed the digital breadcrumbs across state lines. Forensic scientists extracted silent, undeniable testimony from microscopic DNA left behind under a fingernail during a desperate, heroic fight for survival, and a family stood shoulder to shoulder across 7 grueling years, refusing to let the memory of a murdered mother fade into the shadows of an indifferent city. The triumph of that investigation proves an immutable truth. Violence is loud, destructive, and ultimately fragile, but truth and love are enduring. The story of Ebony Harris transcends the grim genre markers of true crime. It is not merely a clinical case study in homicide, nor is it an exercise in sensationalized tragedy. It is, at its core, a human story about the resilience of the human spirit. It is about a young woman who dreamed of a fresh start, who worked herself to the bone for her children, and who fought with every fiber of her being when confronted with unmitigated malice. Her life was violently and unjustly cut short, but her story cannot be contained by the violence that ended it. Every time her sons laugh with the same infectious humor that defined her personality, every time her family shares a story of her fierce determination, and every time someone remembers her not as a static victim, but as a dynamic, courageous fighter, Ebony lives on. The darkness that sought to consume her failed. The secrets were dragged mercilessly out into the unforgiving light of day. The lies were dismantled piece by piece, and justice was firmly delivered. As the final echoes of this harrowing chapter fade into history, Ebony Harris remains a luminous symbol of enduring maternal love. She is remembered not for how her life was tragically stolen, but for how fiercely, beautifully, and courageously she lived it. A warrior whose light continues to burn brightly, illuminating the paths of everyone she left behind, refusing to be forgotten by time or tide. The closing of a true crime narrative does not arrive with the final strike of a judge's gavel, or the quiet closing of a prison cell door. While legal accountability is a vital and necessary structure, removing a dangerous predator from the fabric of society and locking him away for the rest of his natural life, it remains merely an institutional response to an irreparable human catastrophe. For the family of Ebony Harris, the passage of time following the landmark November 2022 capital murder conviction marked not a point of absolute closure, but the beginning of a profound, enduring stewardship, a lifelong commitment to ensuring that Ebony's true essence, her vibrant humanity, and her fierce maternal devotion are never overshadowed by the dark and cowardly act that attempted to erase her. As the years continue their relentless forward march, carrying society far beyond the chilling events of February 25, 2015, the landscape of grief for those who loved her has naturally evolved. The frantic, high-stakes urgency of tracking cross-country flight manifests, parsing through digital cell tower pings, and enduring the agonizing pandemic-induced delays of a frozen judicial system has finally receded into the past. In its place stands a quiet, sacred space of reflection, a place where the family no longer has to wade through the grim mechanics of a brutal investigation, but can instead immerse themselves fully in the warmth of her memory, celebrating the remarkable woman who shaped their lives with such profound intensity. At the very heart of that ongoing legacy stand Ebony's two young sons. The boys who once faced the terrifying, unimaginable reality of losing their mother at an early age are growing into strong, compassionate young men, guided and protected by the unconditional love of relatives who wrap them in a secure, unbreakable embrace. Though the physical absence of their mother is a void that can never be entirely filled, they are never forced to navigate their paths in darkness. They are surrounded by living testaments to who Ebony was. A woman of indomitable spirit, razor-sharp wit, and unwavering strength. They grow up knowing that their mother did not merely endure the cruel curveballs life threw her way. She fought through them with every ounce of her being, working grueling, exhausting hours at a shipping company, pushing past physical and mental exhaustion, driven by a singular, beautiful mission: to provide them with a safe, stable, and loving home. The family ensures that the boys understand the true depth of that sacrifice. They learn that Ebony was a magnetic force of nature, a person who loved music deeply and whose infectious laughter had the extraordinary power to slice through the darkest, most suffocating moments of despair. They learn that she viewed failure as a forbidden concept, treating every obstacle not as an impassable wall, but as something to be climbed over, broken through, or conquered with sheer willpower. That unyielding grit, that fierce, protective instinct, is the greatest inheritance she left behind. A spiritual armor passed down directly to her sons to help them navigate the complexities of the world with courage, dignity, and grace. For Patricia Buffalo, the mother who spent years carrying the unbearable, agonizing grief of outliving her daughter while simultaneously acting as a relentless, tireless advocate for truth, the journey has shifted from a desperate battle for justice into a sacred mission of preservation. Patricia stood as the unbreakable anchor of the family through every dark, twisting turn of the multi-state investigation, refusing to let the trail go cold, demanding answers from detectives, and surviving a global health crisis that tested her patience to its absolute limits. In the years following the trial, her role has settled into that of a matriarch, nurturing a vibrant garden of memories. She ensures that Ebony's name is spoken with fondness, warmth, and immense pride rather than just sorrow, keeping her spirit alive in family gatherings, quiet conversations, and the everyday beautiful milestones of her growing grandchildren. When we step back and view the vast, sweeping expanse of this narrative, stretching from the bustling streets of Houston, Texas, across the coastal military bases of Virginia, down to the holding cells of Florida, and finally into a Texas courtroom, the true power of the story lies in the eternal contrast between darkness and light. Marcus Murphy operated under the delusional arrogance that human life could be treated as a disposable inconvenience, believing that a web of lies, last-minute commercial airline tickets, and calculated silence could bury the consequences of his actions. He relied on the cowardice of secrecy, moving through the world with a polished, disciplined exterior while concealing a profound internal rot. Yet, his entire calculated conspiracy was systematically dismantled by the collective, unyielding weight of human truth. Homicide detectives followed the digital breadcrumbs across state lines without flinching. Forensic scientists extracted silent, undeniable testimony from microscopic DNA left behind under a fingernail during a desperate, heroic fight for survival, and a family stood shoulder to shoulder across 7 grueling years, refusing to let the memory of a murdered mother fade into the shadows of an indifferent city. The triumph of that exhaustive investigation proves an immutable truth. Violence is loud, destructive, and ultimately fragile, but truth and love are enduring. The story of Ebony Harris transcends the grim genre markers of true crime. It is not merely a clinical case study in homicide, nor is it an exercise in sensationalized tragedy. It is, at its core, a deeply human story about the resilience of the human spirit. It is about a young woman who dreamed of a fresh start, who worked herself to the bone for her children, and who fought with every fiber of her being when confronted with unmitigated malice. Her life was violently and unjustly cut short, but her story cannot and will not be contained by the violence that ended it. Every time her sons laugh with the same infectious humor that defined her personality, every time her family shares a story of her fierce determination, and every time someone remembers her not as a static victim, but as a dynamic, courageous fighter, Ebony lives on. The darkness that sought to consume her failed completely. The secrets were dragged mercilessly out into the unforgiving light of day. The lies were dismantled piece by piece, and justice was firmly, irrevocably delivered. As the final echoes of this harrowing chapter fade into history, Ebony Harris remains a luminous, enduring symbol of maternal love. She is remembered not for how her life was tragically stolen, but for how fiercely, beautifully, and courageously she lived it. A warrior whose light continues to burn brightly, illuminating the paths of everyone she left behind, refusing to ever be forgotten by time or tide. The closing of a true crime narrative does not arrive with the final strike of a judge's gavel, or the quiet closing of a prison cell door. While legal accountability is a vital and necessary structure, removing a dangerous predator from the fabric of society and locking him away for the rest of his natural life, it remains merely an institutional response to an irreparable human catastrophe. For the family of Ebony Harris, the passage of time following the landmark November